Order. First up, general business is verification that the meeting is properly posted.
It has been.
Excellent, thank you very much. Second up is opportunity for public comment. Do we have anybody? Nope. Is anybody interested in addressing the board who's not an employee? Excellent, moving on. Action items, we have one on the docket this evening. That would be approval of the minutes. Be looking for a motion.
So moved.
Thank you, and a second.
Second.
Thank you. Is there any discussion on the minutes? Yes, sir. Okay, I was not there last
I
time.
wasn't sure, yeah, so,
No,
okay. So he should be listed as absent then?
yeah, you were.
Nothing
No,
against
it
Mark
wasn't the
Albert.
February, was it the February meeting or the January meeting you're talking about? We didn't have a meeting in February,
So January?
January. Were you there in January, Marco? No, he's not, that's what I thought.
Okay, so,
Yep. I did.
Right.
I did. Well, hope you're ready for tonight.
it's not an attack or anything, it's just, I just happened to notice. Yep, I'm just clear, so, okay, so he should just be marked absent for January.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, sir. All righty. Any other discussion on the meeting minutes for January? All right, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? 5-0. All righty. Next up is discussion information items. First up is policy 5511, dress and grooming.
Yeah, so per a board member request, we have policy 5511 on the agenda for discussion tonight. I will ask for a moment for our secondary principals to come up. We have Rob, James, Laura, Kent, who else is back there? Ryan, Tom, Maria, and Susan here tonight to answer any questions that you might have on the implementation of the board policy around student dress.
Excellent. Welcome. All righty. Who has questions regarding the dress code? Anybody? Any questions, any? Yeah. Oh, feel free, yes.
So, thank you for being here, all of you. Over the years, we as board members have been approached by parents or had pictures sent to us of different students' outfits during the day. And we're wondering, or at least I am, I guess, how did it get to be where the skirts have gotten so short, or the shorts or skirts aren't covering enough, or we're not bringing the kids to the office who aren't completely covered as far as parts that need to be covered. And when my kids were younger, they had the fingertip rule at South, and I know we've had a lot of principal changes, but I guess that was just a guideline and not an actual policy. So as weather's getting warmer and people are going to start dressing with less clothes on, I just wanted to go over our dress code policy and ask that it would be brought forward to this committee. So I'm not sure if I really have questions or if it's just, what are you seeing? What are the problems that either you're not enforcing, or if you are, you're getting feedback from the parents and pushback from the parents, or if you've given them warnings or any kind of discipline, either those aren't working and they're coming back with those same clothes on, or parents aren't aware because they're coming to school dressed differently than the way that they left, or any of that. What are you hearing, seeing on the ground?
Okay.
Closest to the microphone.
Does this pick me up? Okay. Okay. Ryan Pett, Principal, Waukesha West. So our dress code does not give any specifics. It talks about disruption to the learning environment. It doesn't give any certain length. It doesn't give anything to that effect. And so what we do is we we enforce it as what we feel is reasonable. So one of the big things is that students come in all different shapes and sizes, and they wear things differently. So we take all of those things into consideration when that happens. When we see a dress code violation, it is addressed. For me, and I can only speak for me, 100% of the time when it's addressed, I don't know if I've ever written an actual second time that it's happened. So it's been addressed, it's been talked about, things have come into play where that behavior doesn't happen again. We have big schools where we don't get into every classroom all the time. Students know what the dress code is, and so they know at times when to wear something or cover something or whatever it is in the hallways. They might wear something where they might take off in class. I have heard stories where parents, when we have called home or addressed it, have said that's not what they wore to school. So I guess to answer your question from my perspective, it's all of those things are occurring as far as students trying to get away with not wearing what they wore or what it looked like they wore out of the house. Oftentimes we have conversations, parents will say, these are the styles that are out there when it comes to, right now, midriff showing is very common. A while back, I don't know if the policy actually said no midriffs. It might have at one time. It does not say that anymore. Right now, that is moving up towards what I would call half shirts. So if you were to go to my principal's blog, I address we don't allow students to really wear half shirts to school.
One of the things, and I have it up there for the board and anybody else, the secondary administrators, the high school administrators, if you look under the underlined bold text, this is in the high school handbook for students. And it says students should dress appropriately for school and must refrain from wearing items that display excessive midriffs, low-cut tops, and undergarments. So that is spelled out in the high school handbook, which is what supports what Mr. Pat is saying about appropriate dress at his school.
So I would define an excessive midriff as excessive being what I called a half shirt, I guess. Midriffs themselves, sometimes they go up a little bit and they go down as long as it's covering. Generally, that's what we follow as being reasonable. So that's where I started. I'll let any of the other principals come up and address anything different or things they're experiencing or seeing or want to add.
James Murray, Principal, Waukesha STEM Academy. Karen, to your question, I'd say it's all the above. Times are changing, trends are changing, all shapes and sizes, like Mr. Pat said. We've talked to students. There's sort of two varieties of students. Ones that'll change and be okay or throw a hoodie on, or we give them a shirt. Third option is to call home for something. And the second group of students, I guess, are ones that would just defy it and not want to change. And that's sort of where we take the next step and say, if you do not, then we proceed to a write-up, so a major or minor. Repeat offenses are typically when we send a student home, if they outright defy, and would say, I'm not going back to class, I'm not going to change. It's just where I'm at. So rather than go back and forth, because it's a never-ending cycle, I feel at that point, we'll call home to offer parents an opportunity to bring in a change of clothes. Some parents are amenable to that, some are not. So it runs the gamut depending on the student and the families.
I'm Maria D'Amato, principal at South. I would echo everything that both of them have said thus far. We are continuing to communicate this out to families in every way that we possibly can, but in terms of the gamut, we experience the same things. We experience students who just completely defy it and to the point where you are suspending. That's a really unfortunate situation, and then students are losing out, obviously, on their learning. And so, you have to balance. It's that fine balancing act of you don't want to send a kid out every day. We provide them change of clothing. We bring them down to the office, but with 1,200 students, sometimes you may miss one or two. We are using a behavior flow chart at this point where teachers understand exactly where it is that they go, like when students do defy what they've asked and know they have to communicate that to families, and we're writing it up as referrals to document those conversations. So we're definitely doing everything we can to address it, but I would say it's probably less than 2%, but there are probably some repeat offenders that we have had the same conversation over and over with, and are doing everything we can just to change that behavior.
Dr. Piazzik, did you have a question?
Yes, me.
If Tom wants to share, if everybody, I mean, I had a couple of follow-up questions.
Okay.
I don't want to interrupt anybody.
Okay.
You're good. I'm Tom Shelman, Waukesha North. The only thing I would add, I would repeat everything that Maria and Ryan were saying. The biggest dress code issue for us is hats and hoods, actually. Students having their hoodies up over their heads or hats on. In those circumstances, we might have to confiscate a hat or a hoodie, but just for context sake, that's the biggest dress code issue we face.
Mr. Montiel, do you have a question?
I do, but I didn't want to jump in front of.
Okay.
I will defer to you as
Virgil?
the committee member, and then I'll pick up the.
Thank you.
details.
I guess I'm trying to look at this from a policy standpoint. Our role is to write the policy, change a policy, adapt the policy. Your role is to implement the policy. There is a wide margin of difference between our two roles. So I guess the first question I would have is, do you want more specificity in this policy to make your jobs easier, which is one hope, but it also could make it more complex. The more specific it is, the less discretion you have. I'm all about decentralized leadership. You're the generals of the schools. You have broad discretion, but I'm also about consistency across the district for a student experience, whether they're at North or West or South. So I guess I look at the policy, and being the nature of my profession and sitting on this board, I can read this and say, boy, I think I know what that means, but I'm not really exactly too sure. So my sense is maybe more specifics would be easier, but I'm guessing it may just cause more problems too. I know I'm talking in complete circles, but maybe I'm trying to figure out to make the classes and the schools run better, where dress code is not a distraction anymore than it absolutely has to be. It's never going to go away. We had hat problem at North. I was one of them when I was there. So it's never going to be solved, but I need to know, I guess, if you're comfortable, what level of a problem is this? Is this something that's taking up what you think more of your day than it should? And if it is, what do you need from the board, if anything? Do you need support? Do you suggest changes to the policy, more specificity, something like that? So I know that answer could take 3 hours, but if anybody wants to give it a kick, that'd be great. And if no one feels comfortable, that's fine too.
Mr. Montiel, great question. I think for all intensive purposes, that's a high school handbook, correct? That's typically the go-to because the board policy is somewhat gray, fuzzy, and it also puts the administrators, the generals per se, as the arbiters of the enforcing policy. So then in turn, we go to our handbooks, and it has to be spelled out specifically, things like hats, hoods, possibly the midriff, the half shirts, things like that. The distraction to learning, the way I've sort of taken it on, and I've worked with Dr. Cook on this too, is if a teacher or a student will come to me and say this is distracting the learning, it's offensive, it's a slogan, it's a cut, it's a, what have you, then that's where I'll step in and enforce it. The other question I've had is how come they can and you picked me, and to Ryan, to Mr. Pat's point, we can't get into every class every day. And again, to bring that to not to demean by any means, but to a teenager, right, and say, I didn't see them, I'm sorry, you're the one that was brought to our attention, this is why we're addressing it with you. Doesn't always go so well, but that's what we stand by to have a discussion with them. And that question also comes up from parents as well, so which is a fair question, right? Like if I saw you and Pat on the street, Mr. McCaffrey, sorry, and you had a tank top on and he had a suit on, and I'd say, well, you're both going to the same meeting, what's going on? It's just, I may not have seen the other people going with the tank top already, and you might feel like I'm picking on you, and I think that sometimes is what happens. And again, that's talking in circles at that point, because there's nothing you can say at that point that's justifiable. That's going to bring calm to that sense of conversation. So that's a tough part, yeah. So I think it is in our hands at that point, so I don't know if putting some finite details on the policy would help. I think it might personally. It also restricts a little bit as well, but I think it makes our job not easier, but a little more crystallized in the sense of follow-through on that, so.
Thank you.
Dr. Piazzik?
Thank you. Thank you all for being here. You can come back in a couple weeks for teaching and learning, and we could talk about other stuff. It's amazing to see you all in one place on a beautiful spring evening. And so being a parent of teenagers, in particular teenage girl, I completely understand the pick your battles, and not every parent comes with the same threshold of what's appropriate and what's not appropriate. And so as a parent, as a board member, in and out of the schools, and I'm in some schools more than others, I hear things from the teenage girls that say, well, there isn't a dress code. The teachers say there isn't a dress code. The principals say there isn't a dress code. I think maybe to Mr. Montijo's point, how do the kids know? And I think, Mr. Pat, you made a great point, right? Like, well, the kids know what's acceptable or not. How do the students know what's acceptable if there aren't specifics about what's acceptable? And because what I see, and maybe the dad test maybe that's too conservative, right? But if you asked a dozen dads of 12 and 13-year-old daughters what would be an acceptable dress code in middle school, they would probably not say what our girls are wearing in middle school, and yet try to buy a shirt that goes down, past the waist. I've been there, and it's hard. What I struggle with is when there's not specifics, or when we're not clear with the kids about what the specifics are, it seems like it makes things more complicated, and we tend to not want to pick those battles, because I don't want to always pick those battles, and then it just keeps getting away from us. And the example that I would use is, I was at a band concert at one of the high schools recently, and I not only saw half shirts, I saw half dresses. And while I understand that that's an after-school activity, it's a school activity, it's a band concert. And so when we don't apply consistent rules, I feel like we kind of lose that ability to pull it back in. And I don't know how to help that, because I don't want to make your job more difficult. I know I already have made your jobs difficult. So when it comes to our kids, and when it comes to like, what's the boundary that we can't cross, and how do we all do that together in a way that the kids aren't saying, well, there's no rules. They're saying, oh, there's rules. We might not agree with all of them, but everybody has to follow the same ones. Like, what does that look like? And how can we do that together so that it doesn't have to be like they get to guess? And then my bigger concern is that, in particular with the girls, that they feel shamed because they're being called out on something, but they're seeing other people doing it. And I don't think that's something that we want to create either. But how do we do that together?
I think I can speak to South a little bit in that we do, we do have homeroom lessons at the beginning of the year that every student receives that outlines exactly what it is that is expected of them. And that's not just dress code, that's all of the different policies that we know are commonly broken policies. We do that again at second semester through our homeroom lessons, where every student receives a video that we've shared of these policies. And I know North does something similar. I'm certain West does as well. So we are getting this out in front of students. Now, again, we're talking about teenagers, right? They're not known for good decision-making. So we have these conversations over and over and over again, because sometimes they just don't hear the message clearly. Having the policy and the handbook, I mean, it does help in matters. I don't know if making the policy more stringent is going to be helpful. I don't know, I guess that's really my personal take on that. Having the handbook is helpful so that we can at least refer to that. And I guess, I don't know if this is something that is a popular or unpopular opinion, but hats and hoods, like, is there a reason we still have this in the policy is a question that I would love to just consider in all of this. My son goes to Pewaukee, and they've eliminated this from their policy because it just, like, it wasn't a battle that they felt was a battle they needed to fight anymore. So something to consider as we move forward. if that's even up for consideration.
Well, if a hood means that they're wearing a sweatshirt that goes down below their waist, maybe that's a nice compromise, and, you know, we can require this. Thank you, I appreciate that. And I'm curious for any of the rest of you too, and I'm not trying to put anyone in particular on the spot, but do you believe that the students believe that you have a dress code? Do they know what that is? Can they say, this is the dress code? We know what that is. And we know, and so maybe to Ryan's point, a midriff showing versus a half, like, what are we okay with?
I'll speak on the middle school end. The midriff piece isn't in the middle school handbook, but when it comes to vulgarities, alcohol, other things that are clearly outlined, those are in the handbook. The kids know that. The hats, the hoods, they're not that much of a big deal in the middle school. At least I can speak for ours.
The hats and hoods, you mean? Or
the hats and hoods. You know, it's those things that we just deliver, and like Maria was saying, multiple times a year for student expectations. It's communication to families about what it is. Fourth quarter coming up, a parent communication about it as well. And kids know there's a dress code. Kids will say, I've been dress coded. They'll say those things, you know, when they've been asked to change something because of slogans, statements, and things like that. So at the different levels, there's specificity. It's a little bit different. That it moves up, but the kids are aware of it. They know it. They sign off on a student handbook, so they know that it's been done, and we talk to the parents about it as well. One of the things at middle school we talk about too, orientation sessions, what it entails, and really it's about the integrity of the student and not putting themselves in a position to embarrass themselves by something that maybe they're wearing, because of all shapes and sizes and different things. How things fit in the fall are different than the spring. Kids grow, kids change, and we just try to help support them along the way on that.
Mr. Montiel?
Sorry, Dr. Cook, maybe you can speak to this. I'm remembering, I think, prior meetings where there was some issue with the hoods and the hats. I think one reason was students sitting behind those individuals might have difficulty seeing the front of the classroom, but a second reason may have something to do with security cameras.
There was some safety consideration given to if you have a hood up and you can't identify the kids, you know, if there's a medical emergency, if there's a behavior, you know, incident, you know, with the hood up, you know, a sweatshirt with a hood on it, with the hood down is not an issue. It's just when the whole face is getting covered. Now, that was something that was added to policy maybe 5 years ago, where hats and hoods were built into the policy. The policy was silent on that before. And this old language referred to gang colors. It didn't necessarily refer to hats and hoods. So that was, you know, added in based off of some nationwide events that happened.
Okay.
Mrs. Robertson?
Thank you. I have done a little bit of digging, and a school board in Superior, Wisconsin did actually change their dress code, and that was in September. And they said that they could wear halter tops, hats, hoodies, and pajamas. But then the talk about that was, a teacher said, I have to create a safe environment for them, communicate intruders, location, movements, who they are, identifying them. I can't tell who they are. I don't know if they're an intruder or not. They have a hood up. So if something should happen where there is someone in the school, all they would have to do is put a hood up and blend in with everybody else, if you think about that. So that's where safety becomes an issue with the hood. As far as hats, I've heard from many high school boys, like, why can't we wear a hat? If girls can wear a wig, why can't boys wear a hat? And so I hear both sides, and we can talk more about that. I guess my biggest issue is covering up private parts and undergarments. So I wanted to say in the policy where it says shall prohibit student dress or grooming practices which, I wanted to put in, do not completely cover private parts or undergarments at all times. I did have more on that, but I shortened it to that. If we need to go farther, I wanted to say such as cleavage, nipples, and bras or lack thereof, sagging pants, short shorts or skirts, showing cracks, bottoms, or underwear. That's what I'm hearing, and those are the pictures I'm seeing of basically the skinniest half shirt, not a half shirt, what is it called? A tank top, where they're either not wearing a bra and you can see everything, or they are wearing a bra and it's not very fully fitting. And so you can see a lot of the breasts, the cleavage, whatever's hanging out. Or a girl bending over to get a drink of the bubbler and you see everything. And people have to turn away, teachers have to turn away. Girls at a basketball game, now this is after school, wearing such a see-through, it's actually like a guy's white tank top where it's real thin and kind of ribbed, something like that with no bra, and you can see everything. And that was 2 times. And so I actually said, well, call me, and I'll come up there, and I'll take a look at it, and I'll walk them to the first person I see that works at the school and say, why is this person still dressed like this? But I don't want to have to do that. I just want them to be covered, and I want eyes to be protected that shouldn't have to see that. And a lot of times, I would think if the parents saw them like that, they would be embarrassed too, because the parents don't realize that they're taking off whatever. So, whether it's pants sagging down, no, we're not marginalizing one student. I've got lots of information here from other people going to court, whether it's pants sagging down, oh, you're actually pointing to a particular class of student. No, I can look up what judge said, no, everybody should pull their pants up. So, whether it's underwear showing down there, bras showing, lack thereof, all of that just needs to be covered. And I don't know how to ask for this more, because I feel like I've been asking for it for 12 years. Not that it's been brought to you, but I've been bringing this up for 12 years at board meetings. Whether it's ever gotten to you, I'm not sure, or whether it has and it hasn't been enforced. I'm hearing the same thing from parents for the last 12 years, that kids need to cover up. I'm not hearing anything about gangs or anything that's written on their profanities. I would think that if that was brought to you by a teacher or another student, you would handle that. But I don't think that you actually have specific guidelines as to what a person can wear or what they can't wear. And I totally get it if someone is not fitting into something where another girl doesn't have that size problem and someone else does. And where do you draw the line? And are you singling that one out or not? But when you look at our overall population, and it's not just Waukesha, it's everywhere, we have gotten so far from professionalism or getting these kids ready for expectations for the labor force or the workforce. They can't look like that out there. I mean, they can for some professions, but we don't have to go there. But they're not going to look like that. So how can we get them ready now? And yeah, one of these ones said that they can wear pajamas. Well, maybe on a pajama day, but not every day. If you want to look professional, or if you want the kids to act professional and be ready for learning, to have them roll out in pajamas or look unprofessional, I'm sleepy when I stay in my pajamas all day. But if I put on a suit and I'm ready for work, there's something that happens there. So how can we get these kids ready to learn, looking professional? And by professional, I just mean covered at this point. So that's all I want.
Mr. Zenobia?
I guess part of my question would be, and as board members, you hear these things from parents on occasion, and so maybe that's magnified more at the time. You hear it once or twice, and you think, well, that's an issue. As the principals of schools, do you get a lot of parent complaints about what's being seen, or at any level?
I have never received a parent complaint about the way other students dress. 14 years at Waukesha West, and if there's a parent listening that did complain, they would have to remind me who it was and when, but I have not received a complaint in regards to that. Some of the other things that we do proactively, I think, is as principals, we send the message and we reiterate what policy says. So just by reading it on the announcements, sending it out to our community around dress code expectations, those are things that happen, and those are things that we can continue to collaborate on. So obviously you hear it in a homeroom or whatever that message would be versus hearing it from the generals, as was said. That also has weight and meaning when it comes to the expectation of how students dress. So I would have to agree. I think Mr. Murray said the same thing about 1 to 2% of our time is taken up with dress code. So for me specifically, it's not something that I've had parents complain about. I will say we've had conversation in regards to what we allow for athletics and athletic wear versus what happens walking into school. So how can we say, to use an example that was brought up in some of my parent meetings, girls track shorts, cross-country shorts, volleyball as well. And so, those are the things that we work through and work with. And but for the most part, I, in my time, have not had a specific complaint at West High School in regards to us allowing dress code or dress code from another parent being a concern.
Yeah, continue.
Just to follow up to that, I guess, and, hearing what Ms. Robertson had brought up, one of you had mentioned how the handbook was more of a go-to for you than anything as opposed to policy. If these things were spelt out in the handbook more in detail, as was just laid out, would that be a better place? Would that be more helpful? Would that be something that would then be talked about in homerooms once or twice a year? I have no doubt that students are hearing the expectation from the principals. What I've heard from people as well, it's spring, things are going to get skimpier or whatever, but hey, summer's coming, it'll all be over. And then in the fall, it's like, well, it's fall and it's warm and, yeah, they're not wearing a lot, but winter's coming and they'll cover up. That's kind of how I hear the policy or the dress code from parents here. So, again, I don't know if maybe there's a disconnect. My question being, if we were to put more specifics in the handbook even, would that be helpful? Could that be conveyed? Or is this already, do we have to define it that specifically? Sounds kind of like we do, but I don't know, from your perspectives, would it be helpful?
I don't think it would hurt. I think some of the stuff can be a bit subjective, though. I think that's where the fine line gets crossed, right? Based on the individual, the family, the culture, the background, everything else. So I think we need to be careful with that, just from my perspective, sorry. It almost feels like we're middlemaning it, right? Because you have the policy and then you have the handbook. And I don't want to clutter the policies by putting all the stuff in our handbooks in the policy. But it's, the way the policy is written is such, like it's just a conduit to the handbook. So then in turn we go to that as the arbiters of the systems within our school to uphold that. Yeah, I think to your point though, it would help for sure. Consistency I think would be critical across all the sites. I don't know why that wouldn't help from my perspective. If they go from STEM, Butler, Les Paul to West, South, North, East, it doesn't change from 12 years old to 18 years old. I don't know if you go to kinder through fifth on that, but I think as kids, boys, girls, everybody, gets to that age, it should be consistent, no matter where they go then, especially with school choice and the way our district's open.
Mr. Montiel.
Thank you. I guess last comment, hopefully. Here's one thing that's difficult from sitting at this side of the table, is you all are here, and we're asking you questions, which is great. It's what it's supposed to be. I have never in, I think it's 4 years been on the board, have someone from the district in your position or an educator, someone else come up here and say, board, what you're doing is absolutely idiocy. This doesn't make any sense. You're not making our job easier. I don't think they'd say it that bluntly, but sometimes that would be helpful. You just say, look, board, maybe you don't understand what you're suggesting here, what you're thinking is not going to be beneficial for our students, and this is why. I like and respect each one of you. I promise you, if someone would do that, I'd like and respect you more. And I'm not saying there's a counter argument here that's not being made. I just don't know. You're here now, Mr. Murray, respect you, understand your perspective, agree with a lot of it. But if someone disagrees, please speak up. And if you don't feel comfortable speaking here, that's a problem created on this side of the table. And if that is happening, reach out afterwards, reach out to one of us, we'll fix it. So I know this isn't the end-all, be-all of this issue, but if less specificity would be more beneficial, or if you agree, or you just got a better idea, let us know. If someone's got one now, fire away. Otherwise, I don't know, reach out later, but.
So I'll take, Kent Kleinowski at Horny. I think you're asking the right questions. I think what this is really a deeply philosophical question for a lot of this. It's about what do we want our learning environments to look like, and how does the dress impact the learning environments? And I think you can go a whole lot of different ways with this one. Before you were saying, Corey, are you talking in circles? And I think you are, and I think it's the right thing to do, because I think this is not an easy type thing. I've been in a couple of different districts where, Maria talked about hats and hoodies and how does that impact things. In two of the buildings I was at, we got rid of that. And really it was the same kids we had issues with, they continued to wear it and we didn't see any other changes. Is that the right thing to do? I don't know. That's a philosophical thing about what we want our district to look like. I think we have to ask about who these policies are geared towards and who is really on the receiving end of some of it and what we want things to look like. And things do, for better or for worse, will change and ebb and flow. I mean, there was a time when wearing jeans was frowned upon. So it does change, and we got to continue to play with that, but also we still need boundaries. I mean, I'm not saying throw it all out, but I think what you're asking is a really tough one, and it gets into what do we want to represent as Waukesha.
Fair enough. Thank you.
There's more.
Thank you. I was just going to get into that, how times have changed over time and cultural differences, and me being one of the youngest, not that far out of high school, so definitely can relate to that. And so I know that your jobs are hard, and ours are too. And so in my mind, I guess I'm stuck where's the balance of finding that, moderation still with high standards. I don't know what that looks like completely. I have an idea, but I don't know. But I would like to hear from other board members and you all, how do we balance that? I know one of the principals mentioned that some things can be subjective because of cultural differences and things like that, which I understand that too. And then how do we balance that with still setting those boundaries as well? And that's a complicated task. And so I just wanted to throw that out there on, how do we do those things? And lastly, there was the first principal, I believe he, thank you for his comment. I believe he said that, sometimes the policies there's gray areas, and that puts you all in situations where, you have to make decisions based on policies that were not very clear. So that's a job that's on our end that we need to come to our table at our end and fix for you to support you and give you more clarity as well. And also open the door for you all, whatever you all need from us to kind of move forward with this. Like Mr. Montiel said, to speak up and let us know. I feel like, who was this? You're probably like, who was this 27-year-old? Talking to all these older people. But that's just where I'm at right now, so thank you for your comments.
Dr. Piazzik?
Thank you. Who are you calling older?
Right.
A little bit.
Everybody.
A little bit. Everybody. I have some follow-up thoughts kind of with what we started with, because kind of getting back to, I understand the pick your battles and where do we enforce. For me, it would be very important that it would be valuable if all of our students said, there is a dress code I know what it is, and I know what to wear to be in compliance with that dress code. And I suspect that that could make your job a little bit more difficult at the outset. And I want to be clear that and we're not just talking about girls here, right? We've got the muscle shirts and the tank tops and the shorter shorts. Like, you just look at basketball shorts, right? You see them over time. They're short, they're long, they're short. There's actually there's a picture on the wall at Les Paul, on the history wall of a track team from, several decades ago, and I don't think that would pass the dress code, right? But these are these cycles that we go through as a community, and, I think we're in, like, the cycle of lots of skin. Everybody wants to show lots. The shorts are short on everybody. But I do feel like, and I want to be clear because my kids would kill me. I'm not like home serving my own kids. I try to talk to the kids. I try to talk to the parents. What do you feel? They feel anything goes, and there's no rules, or we're being told there's no dress code, or this girl's wearing a shirt that's an open back, and I'm getting told to pull my tank top over my bra to cover my bra strap. So how do we create a simple set of rules that the kids understand, which is, if certain things are showing, you're not in compliance with the dress code, and that may include, maybe to Mrs. Robertson's point, undergarments, certain pieces of anatomy, and again, I don't want to focus just on the girls, because I do think now we're dealing with boys that are wearing very loose tank tops, and, there's a lot of things that, so that if we're choosing to pick the battle, we're doing it in a way that it's consistent with everybody, because if we are singling out some kids, or we're only getting to certain kids, and that's where I hear also from some of the teachers that because there aren't rules or there aren't specifics in the handbook, they don't really process, or they don't really correct anyone, because there's this fear that they're inappropriately targeting one versus the other. And that's my greater concern, is that if we're constantly asking you all to apply judgment about, is this girl's showing too much midriff and this one isn't, or boy, or whatever, then we're not being consistent. And then I suspect we have some parents saying, why is this okay and why is that not okay, which makes it more complicated. But and we don't need answers here tonight. And I understand there's so many more important things on your daily to do. I just think that with our students and our families, that being clear about what we expect out of them and making that really simple for them to follow might make it better for all of us. To Mrs. Robertson's point, and I have some parents say things to me, but I see some stuff and I'm like, wow, I can't believe nobody has said anything about that. But then I don't say anything about it because I don't want to be the one that's saying anything. So I get it. I personally feel like I don't think there's a problem with the policy necessarily. I want to leave this to you all as executives of your buildings to do, but I am concerned when I hear the kids saying that there really isn't a dress code and they wouldn't know if they were violating it. I mean, I think there's obviously boundaries, but sometimes I don't know.
Any other questions or comments? Anything? Well, this is a battle that they're fighting at all the high schools. The high school that I'm at, it's a battle, ongoing battle. We did have the hood and the hat thing a couple years ago, but they dropped that because it was just untenable. School that my youngest daughter goes to has a very restrictive dress code. So it's a balancing act, and I think that you guys are doing a good job balancing it. If you do need some guidance from the board, please let us know, and we can give you some help in that aspect for sure. But thank you for everything that you're doing right now. I know it's a tough battle.
Just so the board knows, the administrators are sending a communication home to families after spring break outlining what the expectations are. I had them up on the panel, or up on the board, based off of the high school handbook. They'll be using that as the standard, the language that you saw up there. Expect that to come out after spring break.
All right,
That's
excellent.
every level school? We're just talking about.
Middle school, high school. The only issue we ever have at the elementary around this has been a kid who wore a cigarette or an alcohol shirt to school, and that corrects very quickly at the elementary.
All right, thank you very much for giving us your time. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
All righty. Next up is Empowering Minds Mental Health Initiative.
So Mark Leonard tonight, he's got a group here, and they will kick it off here momentarily.
Excellent.
Okay, so thank you for the introduction. And tonight we have Amanda Weiler and Jim McLaughlin from United Way here. As you may already know, they have been a strong community partner with us for a number of years. I'll be talking more about the United Way's involvement in the schools in just a little bit when we talk about our PATH program, which they're both very familiar with. But tonight they are here to talk about a new program that United Way is offering to specifically Waukesha South High School as a pilot for something that United Way is interested in working through in a larger sort of arena, but Waukesha South would be the pilot for that program. So I'll let Amanda and Jim kind of talk us through that.
Great, thank you everyone. Again, my name is Amanda Weiler. I'm the Health Portfolio Manager at United Way of Greater Milwaukee and Waukesha County. Before I talk about empowering minds, I'll turn it over to Jim and he'll talk more about the work that we've been doing in Waukesha County for a few years now.
Sure. So I manage the education grants at United Way, and we've had a formal relationship with the district since about 2016. There's three kind of primary objectives that we have, or three projects we have. The first that I think a lot of folks at the elementary level would know is our My Very Own Library program. It used to be called Build My Bookshelf, but it is a free book fair program. So every kid in 3 different schools right now, those are Hadfield, Hawthorne, and higher elementary schools. Every kid twice a year gets a free Scholastic book fair. They get to select 5 books of their choice per fair at no cost to them. And as an added benefit, since a traditional Scholastic book fair is a fundraiser, about 50% of sales go back to the school in the form of a Scholastic credit. Even though the students and families are paying nothing for this, they still get that credit for those schools, and this has generated something to the tune of like $175,000 to date since 2016 in Scholastic credits. So we've mobilized about something like 70,000 books to the district since we've had this project in place since 2016. So that's the first. Others we've had that have been ongoing that I think are really kind of well integrated, pretty strong proof that United Way is really, we care very much about the students that need the greatest services in this district. So Helping Kids Succeed is one that has been decades long, but about 2016 or so we converted that program to focus specifically on the school district of Waukesha rather than a county-wide initiative. In the philosophy that where we can concentrate our supports, there's sort of a synergy effect that we can meet more needs if we focus them in one place. And so Helping Kids Succeed is a grant program where we make grant dollars available to the district to use at its discretion toward projects or toward programs that will meet needs in schools that are 50% or more free or reduced price lunch eligible. So some of the things that have historically been funded is the PATH program that I understand is kind of a gem in a lot of our schools. It's a school-based mental health counseling program. It also provides professional development for teachers and consults for school climate to have kind of this multi-tier intervention to make schools places that are nourishing to mental health for students. Beyond that, we also have the Playworks program. I'm a former middle school teacher myself, and I think anyone that has taught elementary and middle school students knows that recess is what makes or breaks the school day, or the second half of the school day anyway. And so that is something that we've been able to provide. Every year we fund 4 schools with the Playworks Recess Intervention Program. And we've also had some programs that are focusing on pen pals and literacy and middle school oral history project. And that's run through ERAs, through their senior volunteers. And then the last one we just started a few years ago. This is kind of an enhancement we've had where we make an additional $100,000 available per year to Hawthorne Elementary in particular. We use that as a school, capitalizing on that, concentrating our support in one place strategy. And so at Hawthorne, we make these funds available to do anything that will help student learning, school climate, teacher retention, or community perception. And this was born out of projects where we did some focus groups. We call them community conversations with students in various districts, with administrators, with teachers at some schools. And the most consistent thing we heard across those populations was the students that attended the schools with the highest poverty rates knew that there was a perception in those schools that they were the schools that low-income students went to. They were the schools where students would have to leave their backpacks outside of convenience stores. They were the schools where they weren't getting professionals to come with ACT tutoring or career day classes. And so we make funding available specifically so schools can do things that project a positive image and reputation to those schools and add dignity. And in a way that we do that is schools that participate, so Hawthorne Elementary in particular, there is a requirement that that school offers 3 service events per year. It aligns with United Way's mission where everyone should give, advocate, and volunteer in support of their community. I'll share one story. One of my favorite examples is advocate. What is an elementary student going to do to advocate? They're not going to write their congressperson. They learned about, the kid-friendly language uses advocating is learning about a problem and asking others to help you solve it. And what they did is they learned about the dwindling bee population, and then as their project, all the students got wildflower seeds that were bee-friendly, and their assignment was they needed to go to their neighbors and ask them to plant these seeds and explain why. And I can't think of a better way to say that, we asked others to help us solve a problem, and they see the fruits of that effort. So those are some of the examples we have, and the ways that we've helped them are not just feel good. We've had bilingual math coaches, highly specialized support teachers to make sure that we're closing racial and linguistic achievement gaps in that school in particular. And in the process, also freeing up a lot of teachers' time and lowering their stress levels so that they can be most effective at what they're trained at, rather than having to differentiate across a really wide spectrum of needs. So this is some of the stuff that we've been able to participate in since 2016, but we're really infusing a much bigger investment with this pilot project that my colleague Amanda is launching.
Thanks, Jim. So Empowering Minds. At our United Way, we take on big community issues, assuming that they fit the following 3 criteria. So the first one is that we know it's a community issue. The second is that we think our donors might care about that issue. And then the third is that we have internal capacity to move the work forward. So that is what leads us to Empowering Minds. So first, I'll talk a little bit more about the data behind mental health for high school students, if we go to the next slide. So the key point in this slide is that 44% of high school students across the nation experience persistent feelings of sadness or hopelessness. And this 44% is the highest ever recorded rate for these feelings. And this was data taken from the CDC and published back in 2021. Recently, there also is a significant increase in teen girls who persistently feel sad or hopeless. You'll see that increase is pretty dramatic from 2011 to 2021, and right now is at 57%, which again is extremely high, and you'll note is higher than that 44% for all teens across the nation. If we look at some of the statistics within Wisconsin specifically, nearly 1 in 2 students in Wisconsin reported anxiety in 2019, which again, of note, was before the pandemic started. We know that mental health has only been exacerbated by the pandemic, but was certainly an issue that was continuing to increase before the pandemic. Also, 40% increase in the number of emergency department visits at Children's Wisconsin alone for mental health in Wisconsin from 2019 to 2021. So it was clear to us that the data certainly showed that that mental health continues to be an issue for our high school students. As a result, we worked with an advisory council to determine where our kind of lane could be within mental health within our community. And so we identified that we wanted to focus and prioritize on school-based mental health for high school students in particular. So our initiative, again called Empowering Minds, will be informed by these 5 strategic outcomes, which are listed here. And I do want to just note the increase in mental health literacy among adults and students. The Office of Children's Mental Health did listening sessions across the state during the pandemic to learn from teenagers themselves of what they needed and wanted when it came to mental health, both in their general life but then also at school. And a lot of these teens, really a majority of them, noted that they felt as though the adults in their life didn't have the specific language to use to communicate with them about mental health. And so that's why we want to really focus on increasing mental health literacy to ensure that the adults and the students themselves have that shared language to help ensure that the student receives the services that they need. So our main goal for this initiative is going to be creating mental health schools of distinction, which is a phrase that we are coining, but for us that means that each individual student will receive the mental health needs that they need on any given day within the school setting. So this mental health schools of distinction will be informed by the Wisconsin Department of Public Instruction's Comprehensive School Mental Health Framework. And there are 6 milestones of this framework. Those milestones are listed here. They include a needs assessment, which is where we will start with the school to identify the great work that they're already doing, right? We know that Waukesha South is doing some really good work in mental health. So we'll identify their successes and then also identify some of their challenges and work together to meet those challenges. And then collaboration, the referral pathways, and the comprehensive resources is really getting at the main bulk of this system itself. So that is ensuring that students have access to mental health promotion services in the school. So that will be, every student will be able to benefit from those resources. Kind of the second tier of services are early intervention services. So these are for students who might be starting to develop some symptoms of a mental health condition, but don't necessarily need that one-on-one individual support. And then that leads us to the third tier of services, which is treatment services. And again, that's where you might encounter a student who would need that one-on-one counseling service, or they may need to be referred out to someone that will be able to further support them either through medication or psychiatry services, for example. And then the last 2 aspects of this system that we want to work with Waukesha South to create is sustainability within this system itself. So we want to work with this school to continue to foster this environment and the culture around mental health, and make sure that the system is in place so that if there is leadership change, there could be an 8th grade family that really views Waukesha South as a high school that supports their students' mental health, and that could be a draw for that student to go and attend that high school. So that's really talking about the culture, and then of course the financial stability is really important too, and so we'll work with Waukesha South to develop that. And then finally, evaluation. The great thing about school-based mental health is that we know it works. The science is proven. We know that school-based mental health helps to increase and improve academic outcomes. It also helps to reduce students' interaction with the justice system, for example. So we know it works, but we want to evaluate what it is like to implement a system. After talking with the Wisconsin Department of Public Instruction and the Office of Children's Mental Health, they aren't aware of a single school in Wisconsin that is doing all 6 of these aspects at the same time. So that's where we felt like United Way could bring some additional collaboration and cohesion and collective impact work to help schools create a system that is comprehensive and matches that framework that DPI has listed for us. And so for our evaluation purposes, it's really at that systems level change that we'll be doing a lot of our evaluating of. And then finally, I know that's a lot of information, so I wanted to leave you with a few key takeaways. So again, our goal is to work with the school to identify that mental health team, which will include students and teachers, and this work will really be school-driven. So they will be making the decisions and identifying what their unique needs are for their school and who they want to partner with to meet those needs. The second key takeaway is that, again, our overall goal is to meet the individual student where they're at and provide their mental health services as needed for that each individual student. And then finally, we have some long-term goals as well. And one goal that we hope to see is that this will help with some staff retention. Again, with that whole idea of creating and fostering a healthier school environment, we hope that staff will also be able to take advantage of some of the mental health services that will be provided, will hopefully allow them to want to continue in the profession and work more closely with these students moving forward. So again, a lot of information. I'd love to answer any questions that you might have.
Ready, any questions? Mr. Moore?
Thank you for that, and thank you for the awesome presentation. I wanted to follow with the last part. I thought, you know, that was very, just an amazing presentation, and the last part was just awesome. And you talked about how the students and teachers will collaborate to create a healthier school. And I just want to know what that looks like from a typical school standpoint, and then so if you could elaborate on that too, because I'm excited to see, excited to learn. But also, this is my comment to you. I think that that's very important that you talked about how it's going to help with teacher retention and not only service students but teachers. I mean, I guess both students and staff, we're in some changing times, and I think that it's time for us to be realistic that times have changed. And I said earlier to the principals who were in here before, I'm young, but even though I'm not that far out of school, it's still different than when I was in school, right? Like, things could change in 5 years, things change in the next 5 years. So things are constantly changing, and these are some challenging times with students and adults who are experiencing mental health, especially in the schoolhouse, because a lot goes on in the schoolhouse. I was a teacher, so I lived it. I think that mental health is affecting both students and staff. So I'm just curious to know, again, like, what services, like, or if you can't, that's fine. But if you can elaborate, like, what services will be available so they do stay in the profession, that they don't leave, and they feel like they can thrive and see this as a permanent career.
So embedded within that framework that DPI created is specific services laid out for staff. So it includes staff being able to have access to some of that one-on-one counseling. I think that would be one opportunity for the school. And then when it comes to, you know, the students working with the staff to create that environment, I really think it starts at who's within that mental health team, and making sure that, you know, nothing for the students without the students, right? That's really our perspective that we want to take when it comes to this initiative. So it's ensuring that we have student representatives who are at the decision-making table and able to share their feedback in an appropriate way and then come to decisions together with the school staff. Something else that I want to mention is, I know after speaking with a few schools, typically when it comes to initiatives, there's a lot of momentum in the beginning, and then when it comes to actually executing some of those day-to-day tasks, they tend to not have a lot of time to actually complete those tasks. So to address that issue, we want to work with the school and community partners to identify and help fund. United Way would help fund additional staff time to really be the mental health coordinator at the school. So their whole job, their day-to-day tasks would be all about the logistics and implementation of this system. So that it allows the teachers to do what they do great, which is teach, but then also ensures that this initiative can move forward in the time frame that we're working with the schools to develop, to ensure that all 6 aspects of that system are in place.
Mr. Montiel?
Thank you. And thank you to United Way for the programs you have. I didn't know about that book program. I should have. That's a beautiful thing. I used to work at the book fair, and there were always kids that couldn't afford books, so that's a beautiful thing. If you're ever inclined to expand it to other schools, I'm sure we'd welcome that.
Happiest day of the year.
Okay, I bet. As to this, I could spend the next 20 minutes talking about the things of this I like. I think those are obvious. Mental health is a crisis in our schools. It's a crisis in our community. More help is always a good starting point. What I'm looking at, though, is we just passed a parental rights and transparency resolution. Part of that, and I know this is a very high, altitude look at it, I don't have any definition or any details on what the parental role is and how actively would this program seek to find mental health problems in our school. And my understanding of therapy, I don't know if this is therapy or what this is, bridging the gap between school and therapists. Some parents are not going to want their children to have these questions asked them. They're not going to want them to fill out surveys. They're not going to want someone to come in and say, come tell me about your mental health. I know it's not that blunt, but I don't have 20 minutes to explain how subtly it is done. So I need to learn a lot more about that. I'm not expecting that today. I know we're talking on a high-level altitude thing.
I do have a few answers. I neglected to say, but parents will certainly be part of that mental health team. So they'll be working with the school staff and the students to make some of those decisions when it comes to implementing this system at Waukesha South. And then with that being said, we certainly understand the importance of parental consent, and we will continue to follow all of the policies that the district has already laid out for this school itself.
Okay.
Again, we're not here to like replace any of the great work that's already happening. We're not here to make up our own policies or anything like that, right? We certainly want to make sure that we follow all of the district's policies in that regard, and we know we won't be successful unless we have parent buy-in.
Right.
So that's also really important to us too.
Yeah, it's fantastic to hear. And I believe you mentioned that this hasn't been done in a school in Wisconsin yet?
Not all 6 aspects at the same time.
Okay.
So, Mr. Montiel, if I might.
Yeah.
In 2 presentations, you'll see the PATH, Providing Access to Help, the PATH program. That is already a program where we're providing on-site psychotherapy to students, clinic-based setting in our district, and that includes parental involvement and consent before any on-site services would be provided. So that is already happening in our district.
Right.
And presumably that is the same model as far as consent and access. It's just bringing a counselor or a therapist on site so that kids can get the services and remove barriers to treatment, which we have seen in our system for over a decade, which is follow through, how do I get my kids to treatment, the availability of therapists, all of those things that are barriers, that this helps us eliminate those barriers.
Okay, thank you. Because in my profession, we have referrals for minors, grade school, middle school, high school, trying to get therapists. We can't find them. They're booked. So yeah, that's a huge problem.
And all 22 of our schools right now, we are already providing on-site therapy.
Right.
And you'll hear about that in a couple minutes.
Right, okay, thank you.
And this initiative is about continuing to lift up that great work and then provide additional services to students who may not need that such intense care, so that we can provide them with the coping mechanisms and skills so that they don't have to reach that point where they do need that intense care, right?
Okay.
So that's, we're really wanting to focus on that mental health promotion services and early treatment services, knowing that there's a great program already in place when it comes to the treatment services.
Okay, thank you.
Can we just go back one slide?
Sure.
Okay, just to clarify, I thought you used a term earlier like school-based mental health or something like that. So, 2-part question. 1, how is that definition different than just mental health, if at all? And then regardless of whatever the definition is, meeting the mental health needs of each student is quite a high bar. So I'm just curious what measures you have in place to do that, quantitative, qualitative, whatever it might be.
I might respond to that first question about what's the difference in school-based mental health and mental health. I mean, obviously, they're part and parcel. It's sort of a distinction without a difference. But I think, as you'll hear in the PATH program, which is a United Way partner from Family Services of Waukesha, what's so essential about that is not only is there greater consistency because it's right on site, kids are presumably already there, and then it kills two birds with one stone because often students with unmet mental health needs are more likely to be chronically truant, which is also a problem for schools, problem for students, problem for families. So that's one reason why school-based mental health is just an augmentation of what is already a good service for kids that need it. But in addition, as I think any teacher will tell you, is the more kids with met needs, the better those teachers can meet even more needs. But the more kids with unmet needs means the more kids that can't have their needs met because it's so kind of fractured of all those educators' attention. So having something on site that could be done consistently, conveniently, and ideally in a place that is already a trusted setting by a lot of families, that's going to just help everything be more effective. That's kind of what the goal is here, is that we understand that meeting every single child, like not every kid needs intensive mental health. Not everything should be tier 3. But most people at some point will need some kind of intervention. Mental health is not a static thing. It fluctuates in a person's life and in a child's life and an adolescent's life. So what I think the goal here is to prepare schools to be prepared for meeting those needs as they evolve and change. Just having the readiness factor and the plans and referral pathways in place to say, we have a need and we don't have any plan for it, or we don't have any resources to put toward that plan, well, we're going to remove that so that as these things arise, there's a rapid response.
Exactly, and that really goes back to your question about the evaluation and the individual indicators. So again, our main goal within this work, to Jim's point, knowing that mental health is not a static thing, it's not something that we can end, for example, is really going to be focused on that systems level change and creating that system, make sure it's sustainable and that it's in place to respond to those needs as necessary. With that being said, we do want to make sure that the school-based mental health system that is being created is doing what science says it should be doing. So we will be looking at some individual level indicators, utilizing YRBS data and the surveys that Waukesha South already uses to inform the effectiveness of this work. So I have a list of those, proposed 10 indicators from YRBS that I'd be happy to share with you. But we already survey students a lot, so we're not going to add on different surveys. We want to use the great work that's already happening to inform this initiative.
Mrs. Zenobia?
So, just to kind of understand what it is that you're proposing or offering, I guess the first question would be, do you know what the financial impact for United Way will be? Do you already have a sense of what that is or and then what does that go toward? Actual mental health people or the material to monitor what's going on in the school?
So right now we are proposing to provide Waukesha South with $50,000 to be used by the end of 2023 for our pilot program. Again, this initiative is very young, and so we're using this calendar year to learn as much as we can as we look to expand that. So we'll have a different idea of what that financial support can be in 2024 and beyond. That $50,000 will be dependent upon the school through that needs assessment to determine how best to utilize those funds in support of this system in general. So that could look like providing some additional staff time for a therapist. It could also look like some of the materials that you're referencing. It could look like developing some people call it like a Zen den or some space in the school where a student can go to that space with a staff member and calm down or just, use that time to do some of those coping mechanisms that they have learned and are practicing to help get them through a trying time in their school day. So those are just a few examples, but again, those decisions will be made by the school in consultation with the experts that we're working with at United Way who do this work every day in schools across Wisconsin.
And I appreciate that. I guess my question really is then, the $50,000 is coming in, you're trying to find the best way to really implement this program. The program is putting together mental health teams of teachers, students, and parents, correct?
Correct, yeah. They will help inform what some of those services look like at the school.
I mean, and I'm not trying to be, from my perspective, I'm not a mental health person, but my big question here is why would we rely, what is the benefit of relying on students, teachers, and parents who are not mental health experts to inform us on the mental health of any particular school or student population? And we can do surveys all day long. I guess my concern is if there's a material support that's coming into the school of a program, DPI, CDC, whatever, what is the material that's getting to the students and the teachers, and what does that really look like? And that's my big question. I don't see it. I know it's very well intended in an area that needs attention, for sure. So I'm just trying to understand what we're getting. And of the 6 things you mentioned, those 6 things aren't at any particular school now, but it sounds like you have a presence in other schools in the state doing this currently.
So our United Way isn't currently working with any particular schools in this, but we do fund other community agencies that do school-based mental health work throughout Waukesha as well as Milwaukee and Ozaukee counties.
Including the PATH program.
Including the PATH program. We help
Sure.
fund that program. Within that mental health team will also be school staff, so that includes school counselors, psychologists who are mental health experts that will help provide some more expertise to that work. The framework itself, I would be happy to, if you're interested, to send you they have a really good list of what some of those comprehensive resources can be. I'd be happy to send that to you. It kind of lists out some more concrete details of what a school can use to create that safe environment for all students.
I would also add that it sounds like your question is, well, what do non-mental health experts have to say about how mental health should be distributed? But I think what
in part, sure.
Sure. I think the tier 1 and tier 2 interventions, what does it feel like to be in this school? What are the things that bubble up to most of these students' minds? Is it body image? Is it constant connectivity? Is it stress about college? Is it home-based things? Is it current events? Is it whatever? Is it the student-teacher relationship? Those are the kinds of things that the most trusted intervention, the most trusted intervention is always going to be the most effective one. And having the legitimacy of having peers on that committee is inherently going to build some of that trust and legitimacy. I think that's what we mean. It's not as saying like we need mental health professionals with these credentials and licenses and this practice model. That's not what they'd be advising on. It's those lower tier interventions, which, as you mentioned, we couldn't give every single person that could ever find use in a tier 3 service. It doesn't exist. There isn't capacity. And so hopefully this is a prevention measure as well as a responsive one.
It also creates the school-based teams also, and eventually the idea is to expand this beyond Waukesha South, of course. Right. And then they would have voice and choice in what their needs are, because what may be a specific need at South may not be a specific need at another school. So that having those students, those parents, and that staff member who have a pulse on what's happening in that individual school can help direct those tier 1 interventions, the things that they're talking about in order to address, for example, student stress, which has an impact on overall mental health.
And I think I would like to see what you had offered. I guess from, my initial thought is, knowing that you're involved in these other areas already and not choosing to put the funds there where they're already being used and perhaps proven, then, what is the other benefit? I guess the more general approach is what makes me wonder what we're really going for. And again, I'm not an expert in this field by any means, so if you could, that would be great to understand that a little bit better.
I think one of the things for the committee to understand is that what we're going for, we have, through the Teaching and Learning Committee and through multiple levels of data presented to you in academic achievement, attendance, behavior, our prior discussion on dress code, we are looking for avenues to try to improve the experience for students so they can achieve in our schools. And we have done extensive work around universal experience for kids all the way through the PATH program, which you'll hear more about. We've provided on-site, school-based provider or services with our psych, social workers, and counselors. And I look at Mr. McCaffrey, might be the only board member who remembers when the board decided to cancel all of elementary guidance.
I do.
And cut all the counselors out of the program. And the work that we've done to build that in and provide on-site service for kids, this is the next layer of that. We will present to you in the next presentation YRBS information. That's general information that we gather across the schools. This is an opportunity to lend some voice to the fact that 40% of the kids are experiencing this, 15% of the kids are experimenting with that. When you can get parents, teachers, and kids who are living this every day to the table to say, yes, that's our data and this is what's happening, that is going to help us make more informed decisions down the road. Because there is a strong belief that until we get this under control, you are not going to see the academic and the behavioral and the attendance outcomes that you expect as a board and the things that we want to provide and see our students achieve.
Anything else? Any other questions? Mr. Montiel?
One last thing, and Dr. Cook, I think, addressed it, and I don't want to jump the gun on these other presentations, but in a nutshell, this is a discussion information item, which is fantastic, and so are those other ones. What I think I'm going to walk away with this, wanting to more information is, okay, not specifically, but in more detailed forms, maybe it's coming in a later meeting. Okay, South gets $50,000 to finish out the year 2023. Is this contingent on, or are there rules on how that must be spent? Or is it the team that you spoke of, if they have an idea that's different than what United Way has, is that what they go with? Or is it more of United Way saying, here's the 50,000, you guys get your teams together, we'll help you, let's brainstorm, see what the actual issues and possible solutions are at the district, generated from those teams, and then United Way comes in and says, well, we have these resources, pick from these 5, or let's go outside. I need to know what's the give and take. And I don't need to know that right now unless you know it.
We do have it really briefly. So how we anticipate it working, and this is similar to some of the work that Jim's doing in Waukesha already, is the school will go through that needs assessment with school-based mental health experts. People that work, consultants that we're working with to inform this work. Through that, they'll identify what their largest needs are and where they want, how they want to spend that $50,000. They'll then provide us with a budget, and there's really no reason for us to say no, assuming that what they're asking for and what they'll use the money on is really going to that system. I know it's hard. I know a system is somewhat arbitrary right now because you don't have the details in front of you.
Well, that helps.
But it will be school informed. That's our, because we just won't be successful otherwise if it's not school informed.
It's not like a turnkey thing. Here's our 50,000, you accept this, plug it in, and
Right, so we do have a lot of connections in the county, and so we are happy to make those connections if they feel like they need to bring on like a community organization to do some of this work. But again, you know, that RFP process will be, those decisions will be driven by the school.
Gotcha, okay, that's good, thank you.
Any other questions, concerns, comments? All right, fantastic. Thank you for taking the time.
Yeah, thank you.
Sounds like a great program.
Thank you, appreciate it.
All righty. Next up is Youth Behavioral Risk Survey.
And so Mark will take you through our YRBS presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a good night, thank you.
Take care. Okay. So these are the results of the 2021 Youth Risk Behavior Survey. This survey predates my time in Waukesha. I'm at a grand total of 9 months now, so this was done prior to my time here, and my understanding is that the survey itself was delayed due to the pandemic. I believe it was delayed by about 6 months. It's normally done in the spring of, it would have been done in the spring of 21. I believe it was done in the fall because of some pandemic-related issues. But tonight, I'm just here to talk about what some of those results look like and how it informs the work that we're doing at this time, and how it pairs with some of the things like the Empowering Minds initiative that you just heard about. So we'll talk about student safety and school climate, mental health, alcohol, tobacco, and other drugs, and then a little bit of a district update on what we're doing right now. On each slide, I tried to remember to put in the year 2021 because we're not talking about current data. We're talking about data that has been made available to us this school year, but is, quite frankly, a little bit dated. So why do we need the YRBS? Here are some three main reasons. First is that it monitors trends in youth health and risk behaviors, and you're going to see some things in here that I think demonstrate some trends that kind of key into what we've already heard tonight. How knowing the current risks that students are taking helps to create better programming to address needs. Spoiler alert, kids are not smoking tobacco cigarettes anymore. They're using vaping devices. And so if we talk to them about tobacco, what we really need to be talking to them about is nicotine-based vaping devices. So that's one such trend. The next is that data that we collect from this survey is extremely important to us as we apply for grant funding for drug and alcohol, abuse prevention, school safety, and school mental health. All of the information provided from this particular survey is used by the Student Services Office to help write the grant proposals that bring in a significant amount of funding to help us address some of these needs. So in 2021, 2,686 students were surveyed at the high schools. Some of the data you're going to see in here, you'll see twice because it's disaggregated by high school, middle school, and 1,288 students in middle school, 7th and 8th grade were surveyed. In terms of school climate, 78% of the high school students in 2021 felt that they were always or almost always felt that they were safe at school. 74% of the middle school students felt the same, so not a big discrepancy in those numbers. In 2021, 17% of high school students reported experiencing bullying in the past 12 months. If you take a look at the chart, one thing that I think you'll notice right away is if you look at the male-female ratios or percentages, females are reporting it at a much higher rate. And if you look at over time with grades, and the question is bullying a problem in my school? Now, that doesn't necessarily mean have you been a victim of bullying, but is it something that you've seen in the school? And so students are reporting that out at those rates. So 43% of all students feel that bullying was a problem in school in 2021. Again, this is high school. If you look at the middle school, 35% believe that bullying was a problem at their school. But again, the disparity between male and female still stands, that more females are attributing issues to bullying in their school than males. 69% of 2021 high school students and 60% of middle school students felt that they had at least one teacher or staff member at school that they can confide in. So that's always a good indicator of a student's feeling of safety and security at school, if they feel like there is someone in the school that they can trust and confide in. Of course, we always want that number to be higher, and so that's something that we are working on. I'm kind of hopeful for the 2023 numbers on this because at that time, I think everyone felt like their interpersonal relationships were a little bit fractured by the distance in the pandemic. In terms of student mental health, this is no surprise. It keys in exactly with what Amanda was speaking with in the previous presentation. Up 6% from 2019, 57% of students in 2021 felt significant anxiety in the last 12 months. 37%, or up 4% from 2019, reported depression, which was prolonged and disruptive sadness in the last 12 months. And 25%, or up 5%, which is really significant if you think about those numbers, engaged in self-harm in the past 12 months without the intention to die. Those could be things like cutting or other types of self-harm. I think that tracks very much with what we've seen from other data points from 2019 to 2021. 20% of 2021 high school students seriously considered suicide in the past 12 months, compared to 17% in 2019. Again, an enormous difference between male and female students. At 2021 high school students, 16% made a plan for suicide attempts, 10% reported making an actual suicide attempt. Again, high school students. For the middle school, 19% of 2021 middle school students reported seriously considering suicide in the past 12 months, compared to 16% in 2019. And again, if you look at the percentages, 11% of males, but 28% of females. So, you know, as you look at this data, clearly there is work to do with female students in terms of depression, anxiety, suicidal thoughts, and those are things that are informing our work as we move forward. 12% of 2021 middle school students made a plan for a suicide attempt, where 6% reported making an actual attempt. Family mental health, research has demonstrated that exposure to childhood adversity, they call it ACEs score, or adverse childhood experiences, has an impact on adult mental health, increasing the risk for depression and suicide. So students who report ever having lived with someone with a mental illness, that's 49% of females, 34% of males, or 41% of students overall. That number goes up as students age through the system. The next section is on alcohol, tobacco, and other drugs. Vaping. In 2021, 30% of high school students reported ever trying vaping, while 13% reported vaping currently. And we'll talk a little bit about what we do to help curb vaping later on in the presentation. But 39% of students who vape reported starting vaping prior to the age of 13. And that, I think, speaks to the accessibility of vaping devices in the community. Again, more females than males are vaping, and I believe at an earlier age. Although if you look at, you know, by the time they hit 12th grade, 19% of students say that they have used vaping products within the last 30 days. And again, these are 2021 numbers. It'll be interesting to see what happens with the 2023 data.
Mark, do you think that the females are just more honest in these, and that would account for the huge disparity in some of these?
You know,
I mean, you don't want to be the tough guy, so you don't admit to a lot of stuff.
That may be the case, or yes, they.
I mean, some of them are huge.
They may be more honest because you know, they're more open in general about talking about their feelings or about their experiences, or it may be that, you know, there truly is a higher level of stress.
Right. I mean, it's some of the numbers are scary.
Yeah.
Between the genders.
Yep. And you know, anecdotally, I have nothing to back this up, but I do think there's a correlation, and it doesn't really get into this in the survey, but social media playing a role. And I think social media around girls oftentimes, and boys, but I think girls bear the brunt of this, where it's about looks, about popularity, about connectedness to others. I think boys just kind of worry a little bit less about that, where girls feel like they can be left out and can be slighted because of what's happening on social media. It would be interesting to see, you know, and I don't write the survey, of course, but to see what other surveys out there about social media trends would correlate with what we're seeing in here.
Sure.
So, 4% of middle school students currently reported vaping within the last 30 days. And again, these are 2021 numbers, but females, again, reporting out higher than males. And over time, the number, oh, that's interesting. It says 4% for both. There must have been a difference in the size of the population between those two grade levels.
Right.
77% of high school students perceive tobacco as a moderate or great risk of harm. That's actually a good thing. These are protective factors where students say, yes, I realize that, you know, smoking, for example, will harm my physical health. So if 77% of students think that, that's great. 78% of the middle school think that as well. These numbers are going to be interesting. I'll point out why in just a minute. So 95% of high school students believe that their parents would disapprove if they smoked tobacco. 78% believe that their friends would disapprove if they smoked tobacco. But again, look at the way at how the question is worded. Mm-hmm. We're talking about smoking tobacco. Mm-hmm. If you asked our principals tonight how many times they have confiscated tobacco cigarettes this year, I think the number is going to be extremely low in comparison, especially to nicotine-based vaping devices. For middle school students, 98% believe that their parents would disapprove and 90% believe that their peers would disapprove. So there's clearly been a lot of work done about the dangers of tobacco and about the social stigma of smoking. 54% say that high school students use some type of tobacco would have tried quitting in the past 12 months. When we meet with students who have had multiple nicotine vaping incidents, the question really becomes, are you trying to quit? Do you need help quitting? And some of them say, yes, I do. I'm addicted to nicotine and I would like help with quitting. And that's where we partner with parents about having that conversation with their pediatrician or another health provider to help get kids off of nicotine-based vaping devices.
Does the district provide any resources on that, or just connecting with parents?
We do. When students are caught first offense for nicotine-based vapes, they do the Aspire program, which is an anti-tobacco and nicotine use program as part of their behavioral requirements, their disciplinary requirements. So that is something that we do. As far as actual smoking cessation courses or nicotine cessation, no, we do not provide that. We would refer them to their healthcare provider for that.
It is important to note, though, that the board policy on nicotine does allow for, if a student is on a prescription nicotine cessation product, the policy allows for that to be at school. So to the degree that you allow them to go through that, the patch or whatever it might be, that is acceptable at school with a doctor's note.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Thank you. In terms of alcohol, 44% of high school students report ever having an alcoholic beverage. That's more than a few sips. We're not talking about the wine at church. We're talking about students who are drinking for the purpose of drinking. 22% of the students reported current use. And again, if you look at the male and female graphs, there's a difference there as well. 6% of middle schoolers in 2021 reported some use of alcohol. 30% of high school students who drink reported having had their first drink prior to the age of 18. So again, it speaks to the need for early discussions about alcohol, middle school or below. One of the things we utilize in the district is the Too Good for Drugs initiative, as well as our health curriculum. Those both talk about the dangers of drugs and alcohol. 13% of high school students report that they rode in a car with a driver who may have been drinking. 3% of high school students report driving after they had been drinking. Again, the question doesn't ask who the person was that was driving, of course. This goes back to the information presented earlier about tobacco. This is about perception of parental and peer disapproval. But look at how the numbers have shrunk a bit. When we're talking about tobacco, it's in the 95% or more. When it's alcohol, well, it's 90% believe that their parents would disapprove if they drank alcohol nearly every day. Well, I would certainly hope so. 71% believe that their friends would disapprove, but the disapproval numbers are not as high as they are for tobacco. Among middle school students, 95% believe their parents would disapprove if they drank alcohol nearly every day. 87% believe that their peers would disapprove. And look at how that changes over time as well. What is normalized or what is acceptable within their peer groups. Marijuana. 23% of 2021 high school students reported ever trying marijuana. The numbers between males and females actually are pretty comparable in this. 12% of high school students, 6% of middle school students report currently using marijuana. That's using it within the last 30 days over time. Of those who currently use, 17% started at age 13 or younger. I'm sure I'm preaching to the choir here when I mentioned the $1.5 billion in marijuana-related sales that are coming out of the state of Illinois this last year. That overall number is expected to go down, but that's only because Missouri recently legalized marijuana, and so people who were at one point driving to Illinois will now be driving to Missouri. It's a problem with our neighbors as well, and that makes it more accessible to our students, unfortunately. 45% of high school students perceive moderate or great risk to using marijuana. This is where we have work to do. If you look at the numbers for tobacco or for alcohol, the risk assessment from students is way higher than with marijuana. So there is work to be done about what the risk is of using marijuana for our high school and by extension our middle school students. 85% of high school students believe that their parents would disapprove if they smoked marijuana, but again, it's higher than alcohol, but not as high as tobacco. 58%, and that number is way down, believe that their friends would disapprove if they smoked marijuana. That's among high school students. For middle school, 96% believe their parents would disapprove, 88% would believe that their friends would disapprove. Other drugs, this backs up the information that we had from the Waukesha Police Department as well. We had a conversation with them earlier this year. 12% of students report misusing over-the-counter drugs. 1% report ever using heroin, 1% report ever using methamphetamines, 3% report any lifetime use of any other type of illegal substance. In terms of what we're doing as a district, our district AODA coordinator is Jody Ebbinger-Bentley, who does a great job for us and helped out with a lot of this presentation, so credit to Jody. We have the School District of Waukesha Substance Use Prevention Committee. We last met last week at West. We have 10 different community groups on that committee, along with representatives from all the various schools. It was created back in 2019 to collaborate with the Waukesha County representatives for the Drug-Free Communities Coalition. Things like the Waukesha County Heroin Task Force. That's another prominent group that we work with. Quarterly meetings this year, we feel like our efforts are established and our relationships are strong. They're great resources for us when things do come up. Elevate is one of the community partners that we utilize. They're located in Jackson, but we continue to support our AODA coordinator with this effort in assisting with planning and implementation because they're the experts in the area and they work with us every single day. Current programming, I've already mentioned Too Good for Drugs. Both at the middle school and expanding into the elementary schools to talk with students about AODA prevention. Costs nothing to the district. It's 10 lessons that are evidence-based delivered in the middle schools. Horning, Butler, and Les Paul are all currently implementing the program. STEM is on board for next year, and we continue to see positive results in pre- and post-testing on Too Good for Drugs in terms of the students' understanding of drugs and also that preventative idea of that these things will do me harm. Elementary school, we are in a second year of a pilot grant-funded program in 4th and 5th grade at Hadfield and Prairie. We are looking to expand that. Those are provided by school district staff. Peers for Peers is a youth-led peer helper program, empowers youth to be leaders and role models, providing them with skills. You know, kids would say, well, drugs are everywhere. The peers say, well, we're not doing that. You know, we're avoiding that because we want to make good choices and we know that it's bad for you to get involved in drugs and alcohol, so the peers are there to help out with that. They do extensive training twice a year. They meet regularly with their advisors to plan awareness campaigns. I'll show you that in just a moment. Elevate provides training and support for free. This was at the Waukesha North versus Waukesha West or South basketball game in January, where kids were there. They had like a little resource fair, had a lot of giveaways for things that talked about be the majority. In other words, be the kid who's not using drugs or alcohol. It was a great night. They had quizzes and kids could win prizes if they answered the questions correctly. There was a Plinko board to play and a lot of great things from the kids. I already talked about Aspire. This is that early intervention for students who've been found to be in possession of a vaping device at school. It's an interactive, online, free program that we utilize that students complete as part of their behavioral interventions. 52 students were referred to date, 36 completed, and 16 in progress. Prime for Life is an evidence-based prevention, intervention, and pretreatment program for people who might be making high-risk choices. We use this if there is possession of marijuana in a school setting for first offense. It's to change drinking and drug use behaviors, increases knowledge about that risk-taking behavior and how that can impact a person throughout their life. Used for violations of the drug or alcohol policy. Elevate actually does the instruction on that, again, because they're the specialists. It's a 3-part series held after school. It's actually at Waukesha East with a maximum of 12 students per class. So far, we've had 54 students referred to Prime for Life for the 22-23 school year, 43 high school students and 11 middle school students. And if parents do ask, they can self-refer their students to this program as well. You know, if a parent said, I found something in my kid's bedroom and I don't want to talk about it, but I'd like to get some help, this is something that we would offer as an option. Parent caregiver education, we have the Substance Use Prevention Committee that provides parent or caregiver education. There was recently a night at Waukesha North talking about items that you may find in a teenager's bedroom that would be red flags for drug or alcohol use. Prairie and Hatfield parents are provided with information about Too Good for Drugs, as well as current drug trends. That wake-up call presentation was the one at North. That's the last bullet point. Any questions about that can be directed to Jody or me, and some sources of information. So any questions? Thanks for your attention. I know I'm going through that really quickly.
Dr. Piasek?
Thank you. I'm going to let the committee members lead the conversation, but I just have one really quick question. Those events that you mentioned, like the parent meetings, how well attended are those?
I think they felt like the one at North was fairly well attended, you know, given the time of year and the intended audience. I think it went out to all the secondary schools. I think they felt like it was time well spent.
Met or exceeded our expectations?
I think it met their expectations. Mm-hmm.
One of the challenges, though, that we do face is we get the choir usually to show up, and oftentimes the people who need the message or need the resources, they don't attend. So, you know, the more that we can promote and the more opportunities we can have, hopefully it does make an impact, which is why that prioritization, you know, 2 elementary schools to talk about this, hopefully we can catch the kids and the families younger, because by the time they're in high school, the families who are engaged and they're coming for the information. But we often have a large group out there that is not attending.
Agreed.
Any questions?
Yeah, I've got some,
Yeah.
yeah.
Go. There you go.
You had mentioned the fact that use of tobacco is somewhat dated, and, you know, vaping is obviously much more current. I don't know if in this year's survey, if they either added vaping to that question or had a separate question with just vaping by itself.
I don't, off the top of my head, I don't recall if that was changed. I mean, I'm sure that it really comes down to the wording that a student's going to understand. If you say tobacco, they may believe that that's either chewing tobacco or tobacco-based cigarettes versus nicotine-based vaping devices. And of course, what we're seeing are nicotine-based vaping devices. So I don't know if they've asked a more specific question at this point.
Okay. I guess we'll find out.
Yeah.
The results. And then do you know when we're supposed to get results for the 2023 survey?
I'm
It's still going.
hoping for the fall, or at the latest, early next spring. As I think I mentioned before, the testing window, I believe, just closed. So it's a wide window that they have to administer the survey, and then they have to compile it.
Okay, and then the question about suicide is what made me think about this, but I don't know if the district has given any consideration to identifying people who are in the LGBTQ community. And not necessarily specific for that question, but that's the one that jumped out at me. You know, we often hear that they're 4 times more likely to commit suicide. I think that, I don't want to argue that statistic, but I think it's potentially misquoted. I'm not saying they're not more at risk, but I've also heard it that they're just 4 times more likely to think about it versus actually attempt it. So anyway, that often happens with statistics is, it's somewhere and then people kind of grab onto it. And again, I'm not saying it's not true, it's just that it's, I think there's some misinterpretation of it. But regardless of it, whatever that statistic is, has the district considered identifying them to see if in our district, if there is a greater risk and maybe how much greater it might be if it is greater?
So later in the evening, we're going to hear about a group, it's not in the state, but I just wanted to have it here for you for information purposes, that is taking a more clinical, site-based clinical approach to identifying anxiety, depression, and suicidality. And so you see this information in the YRBS, and it gives us good information, but it doesn't give us a lot of actionable things like where we can drill down specifically for a student. What you'll hear about later is an area out in Montana where they are actually looking at who is high risk of suicide and how can we get them into treatment right away. And it's not really broken down male, female, gay, straight. It's really focused on who actually has the need. And so you'll hear a little bit more about that later. It's not anything that we have really in the planning for here, but I just want you to have some perspective as to who's doing it where and how it's looking and what they're seeing. So we'll get to that in a little bit.
Okay.
Any other questions?
Any other questions?
I know you earlier, thank you. I know earlier you mentioned I know Mr. McCaffrey asked you about the gender
Discrepancy, yep.
gender discrepancies in the gap. I was going to ask in regards to that with the gender discrepancies with our students. And I know you responded to him by saying social media plays a big role. I'm just curious to know how we can, I guess, reduce, I guess, a lot of that social media aspect so that they don't feel that they, have to, I guess, quote unquote, be popular or things like that. I think every student should have the right to go to school and be valued and feel like they are, belong. We all believe that, I'm sure. So, that was just very touching when you said that. So I'm like, okay, what can be done to help students not feel that way, and based on seeking validation from their, popularity on social media?
Yeah, I believe, one of the things of the Empowering Minds initiative that was the United Way was here to talk about, I think that's one of those tier 1 interventions that we can talk about and look at closely and make a determination if that's truly moving the needle on student mental health. And then how do we, as a school, address that? Now, of course, we don't want students on Snapchat in schools, period. We want them, their phones off. I would always say off and in your locker, and kids scoff at me. But, we don't want them on social media during the school day unless there's some really specific educational purpose behind it, which escapes me at the moment. But, how do you help students to understand that social media is temporary, but your mental health is forever? And that, you were all teenagers. In that time in your life, your friends were your world in a lot of ways. And the opinions of your friends meant the world to you. And how do we help students navigate that? And I think that's one of those things that the United Way can help us with. And how do we discuss that and address those needs before it gets to that point where it's damaging their mental health?
Thank you. And I will also just say, and follow to that, if I may, as far as the gender discrepancy wise that was talked about earlier, that is very alarming too. I don't want, either side, girls or boys, to, as far as the girls, when we talked about it earlier, I know, they tend, you said they tend to have a, tougher time, which, and they really, really do. And, it's not right, it's an unjust thing. So I do see that point. And then I'm wondering, is there any way that is there any way that what I'm asking is, how to kind of close those gaps, those gender discrepancies, with maybe working with both, genders, I guess.
That's
Or, other genders, I guess, if, I just, want to see, are there the options or opportunities if they can be closed, whatever.
And I think that's where we lean on those mental health professionals to help us understand the reason behind that discrepancy, and also to help us understand how can we close that gap.
Anything else? Dr.
I'm
Piazzik?
just going to add one quick thing, because I appreciate where Mr. Moore was trying to go with that. There is a difference between men and women in terms of the severity of mental health symptoms and complexity. So this is something that obviously we're seeing it earlier, and we're seeing it in our kids. But, for a lot of reasons that probably my husband and I have tried to figure out for a long time, we don't know exactly, but we do understand that males and females are wired differently. So that gap does tend to close over time as people get older. But I think, rather than trying to create, equity in the problem, I think we need to provide the best resources that we can. So, an understanding that our female students may have a higher demand for support than our male students. But I just wanted to comment that it's not just with our kids. It's a real thing with our whole population.
Ready? Anything else? Mrs. Zenobia?
Just maybe a comment. One thing that jumped out at me was some of the lower prevalence of some drugs, heroin and meth and other things. I was kind of surprised that some of the usage was so low. And maybe the prescription drugs was, I think it was 12%, but I know some of the areas, especially, heroin use was way up years ago around here. I believe the survey is that what you're also seeing here and, around in our district, that those specific things are really that low. And kind of a bridge on that is, I've heard that a lot of things that are used with vaping devices other than, nicotine and things. So how does that kind of break down for?
Right, and I think to answer your first question, that was a question that we asked of the Waukesha Police Department when we met with them in the fall. Like, what are you seeing on the streets? And what they said that they were seeing on the streets is what we see in the schools in terms of, the availability of THC-based vaping devices or marijuana vaping devices. Nicotine-based vaping devices are ubiquitous. I mean, they're everywhere. In terms of things like heroin, they did not report that they were seeing that at a high rate. And, I do think the parents really do stand up and take notice about things like heroin or fentanyl, is another example. That they understand the seriousness of all those things, and I do believe they're having those conversations with their students about them. So that's a good thing.
I mean, there's just a general laxed attitude towards marijuana. I mean, if our high school principals and middle school principals were still here, the number of discipline meetings that they have where it's been a marijuana vape and the parent it's no big deal. Mark and I can talk about pre-expulsion meetings that we've had where I don't know why you guys are even suspending. So there's that attitude. But again, what Mark shared about what the police had said to us, the heroin, the fentanyl, the prescription drugs, it's not that it's not in our community, it's just that our youth are not participating in it yet. They're starting to see that among the young adults, the 19 to 25-year-olds. They've seen an increase in that age group, but the younger kids, not yet. And thank God, right? I mean,
thankfully.
We don't want to be dealing with that one.
Nope.
Okay. Thank you.
Anything else? Any other comments, questions? All right.
Okay,
Excellent.
thank you. I actually have the next presentation as well.
Okay.
I thought I'd hit you with everything all at once.
Well, we appreciate that. That's the plan.
The last item for my agenda tonight is more information about our PATH program, our Providing Access to Healing program that you've heard a lot about tonight. These are school-based mental health services. The actual services are provided by Family Service of Waukesha. But we partner with them to provide the space, the opportunity, and to move that program forward. So why? Well, we've talked a lot about tonight is an increase in overall student mental health needs. Jim McLaughlin talked about it, about removing those barriers to treatment. I think, at various times throughout the year, you've probably all said that you're hearing in the community that getting access to mental health can be a real challenge. And this is one step that we can take. And this is a Tier 3 intervention. I mean, this is for kids who are really in the high level of need area. This is not, zones of regulation where you're talking to a kid about the ability to moderate their own behavior. This is where they really are asking and crying out for help. So we're removing that barrier to treatment by making it available to them in the schools and increasing that access. School staff capacity is limited. Our school counselors are not licensed therapists. Our school social workers are not licensed therapists. And so by having a referral process where they can provide students and families with a licensed therapist, it helps to close that gap. This is a part of the DPI's school mental health framework. Again, a Tier 3 intervention, and to shorten the treatment gap. I've heard it twice this year where mental health professionals had said there is oftentimes a treatment gap between when there is an onset of acute mental health needs and treatment. And for some people, that gap is as long as 11 years. From the time that they first start to experience a mental health need that is acute and when they actually get help that helps to move the needle. That can be as long as 11 years. Now, having conversations like this will help to close that gap. Family Service is our partner. I work closely with their development director, Laura Sharon. She's a great partner. We met again today. We meet at least twice a month, but probably more frequently than that. This started with a vision and collaboration from various nonprofit organizations in Waukesha County. Family Service is one such organization. They use a billable model, meaning students that are seeing family service therapists in the schools, those therapists are coordinating with families regarding health insurance. If they have private health insurance and Family Service can accept that, they accept that. So it becomes a billable model. Same thing with Medicaid. If the student is eligible for Medicaid and they can bill Medicaid for that, they're billing that. That helps to keep the overall cost down for the district and also helps to keep the treatment going for the student. Started with a number of limited seats at each school. The current schools are listed. You'll notice that not all schools are listed. That is not because of a lack of need or a lack of desire on the part of either Family Service or the school district. What we are grappling with right now is a shortage of qualified therapists. And every meeting that I have with Laura starts off with, do you have any news on the person that you were interviewing recently? And lately the news has been good. They were able to provide us with an additional 2 therapists to help out at our schools, but they're struggling with the same types of staffing shortages that I think every industry is dealing with right now. We currently have 96 available appointments. The fill rate is 92%, so it's very high. The barriers are lack of available therapists and required paperwork from families. I actually spoke with one of our principals who went above and beyond. He said, I take a clipboard out to the pickup line and I get them to sign while they're sitting in their car. That's outstanding work, and I appreciate that. So we do have to adhere to legal, ethical, and confidentiality guidelines and requirements of HIPAA and FERPA. What that means is the school staffs are not talking with the therapist about what the student is telling the therapist. What they can talk about is things like common languages for treatment. So for example, if a student comes in with anxiety and is seeing a therapist and is talking through their anxiety, the therapist may give them a series of behaviors or things that they can do to help to calm their anxiety. The there's one of them where it's like, what do you see, what do you smell, what do you touch, what do you feel, what do you know, and that just helps to bring that student back to their center. If that's something that the therapist is working on with that student and can share that with the school counselor or the school social worker, that's the type of thing that's an acceptable exchange of information. In each of these situations, all the paperwork between the student and the parent and the therapist spells out what can and cannot be shared. So the parents are very much aware when they sign off on that on what kind of information gets shared with the schools. PATH funding is funded in part by the United Way grant, the Helping Kids Succeed grant. And the goal is student achievement, as Jim said tonight. If you're not meeting their mental health needs, it's very hard to meet all their academic and learning needs. And in some cases, these conversations turn to family needs, and that may be referrals to outside agencies. Family Service, of course, has a clinic here in Waukesha where they can, families can meet if they need to. Educator effectiveness and retention, again, if a teacher's spending time helping a student with their anxiety, there's other things that may not be getting met at that very moment. And then just community awareness engagement to make families and community members aware of the fact that these services are available both here in the schools and as well as in the community as a whole. The grant funding helps to increase the capacity of the therapists within the building. Builds that knowledge and capacity within our staff. Some of the therapists are actually meeting with staff to talk about things like zones of regulation for some of our younger students who may be dysregulated when they come to school on a Monday morning, and how to address those needs. And again, that model becomes sustainable because of those billable hours within the system. In terms of measures, outcome measures, Family Service gathers a lot of this information for us on our behalf, but these are things that we see when the therapy is successful. Increased improvement in communication skills and social skills. Students who are able to self-regulate their emotions. Students can better articulate what the problem is that they're dealing with. They can maintain appropriate behavior or improved behavior at school. Students find the resources that they need that are beneficial to them. And that increased communication and engagement with the school and in their child's education, because of course there's that release of information so that the therapist is then talking with the parent as well about what they can do to help support their child. The vision, oops, sorry, that doesn't show up really great on the screen. PATH is tier 3 and is intensive. I mean, this is for kids with the highest level of need. The continued vision is those ongoing tier 1 and 2 supports for student mental health that we've talked a lot about tonight. The pace of expansion for this is therapist dependent, and the need is certainly there. I mean, nothing would make us happier than to have a PATH therapist in every single school. We'll make those available as they are available to us.
And we have historically had therapists in each of our schools.
Yeah.
So this is more of a workforce dynamic that we're facing right now than what has been the historical availability.
Yep. And then, of course, when we it goes beyond our availability to help at that very moment, because perhaps all the therapists are staff, we utilize Care Solace. You've gotten frequent updates in your packet this year from me about the Care Solace utilization when PATH is not an option, or for parents who may just have a preference. And I mean, some parents just say, I don't want my kid talking about this at school. So then we would say, let's utilize Care Solace to help you find a therapist in the area that hopefully can see you in a reasonable amount of time. And Care Solace also does AODA counseling, or they do referrals for AODA counseling. So as I meet with students and families about the pre-expulsion process, if it's for THC, for example, that's oftentimes a go-to in that meeting. I did update this today, so that if you saw the packet earlier, the numbers have changed. These are numbers as of this afternoon. So for Care Solace, March we're up to 270 inbound interactions into Care Solace. That's a high for the year, and it's March 21st. 1,500 communications saved so far this month. Not quite a high for the year. December was the highest, but March isn't over yet. 39 warm handoffs into care. That's where our staff or parents are reaching out and helping to connect to Care Solace with, of course, parent permission. Family-initiated cases, there have been 3 this month. 22 total appointments into care so far. This is where people are actually making and meeting that first appointment. Not quite a high for the year yet. December was the highest. And then anonymous searches, that's 8 so far. And just as a reminder, Care Solace is available not just to students and families, but also to staff. And although I can see numbers like this in the dashboard, I cannot see anything about any specific person or about staff or anything like that. So staff should know that all of that information is, of course, confidential and not in any way available to the district, other than this type of number. So. Additional mental health supports that we've grant funded through this year. One is our district bilingual mental health navigator. She is contracted through Family Service and helps connect families to supports and interventions. So this is a live in-person person who works in the district. She focuses on our Latinx and E-Achieve populations, where we saw a few years ago there was kind of a blind spot. And she works with families and students and district staff to help connect to mental health providers. But it goes way beyond that. We're talking about food pantry needs, shelter, clothing, navigating enrollment. There are all sorts of ways in which that navigator helps to support families in their needs in the district. And then our student engagement and attendance specialist, that's housed at South but not specific to South in every way. Also supports student attendance, mental health and well-being. She's literally driving kids to school on a daily basis to make sure that they get there. Collaborates on attendance and truancy processes. There have been some changes at the county this year about truancy. She is helping with the police department and the schools to help bridge that gap. Removes those barriers to attendance, whatever they may be, again, clothing, shelter, student-related needs. Mentors individual students, and provides home visits and transportation as needed. So those are also grant-funded positions that we've utilized this year, and that I think in a lot of ways are unique to Waukesha. So good work being done.
For sure. Any questions on anything? Mrs. Zenobia?
So these 96 appointments, that's how many, that doesn't really tell us how many students are going through, correct? That's how many appointments they would use?
Well, 96 slots available to students.
Okay.
Yes.
So is there an idea of how many students are currently cycling through this, or, I mean, there's, the need would obviously vary, or how much time, is it 6 months, is it a year, is it?
I don't know the exact answer to that question, other than I think for a lot of these students, it's long-term.
Okay.
We even have appointments over the summer that are available to continue that continuity of care for kids, because just because it's summer doesn't mean their need doesn't change necessarily. So,
just to try to get a sense of how many students this is actually serving.
Yeah,
here.
and understand when a senior graduates out, for example, then they would be referred back to Family Service to be able to continue treatment in their clinic. Another thing that may happen is, depending upon the insurance may say, well, we'll pay for X number of appointments, but no more.
So that fill rate of 92%, it's pretty consistent then, roughly, okay?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, the longest delay, once the need has been established, is just getting the parent to return paperwork oftentimes.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Yeah? No? Excellent.
Thank you all very much. I greatly
Thank you very
appreciate
much.
it. Yep.
All right, next up is the Rural Behavioral Health Institute.
Yeah, so we're very fortunate tonight. We have Dr. Janet Linden with us, Dr. John Greist, and Dr. Revere Greist with us. And they're going to take us through, so what we did tonight was try to provide you an overall with all the layers of mental health and support that we provide, starting at the beginning of it with kind of the most general, where we're talking about tier 1, tier 2 type things that they're talking about possibly doing at South, through YRBS data, through PATH and everything else. What this gets to is an area where I think a lot of the concern and a lot of the discussion came up around, like, what do we do? How do we actually access kids? What are we doing around anxiety, depression, and suicide, and our fear and concern that, we're not going to get those kids soon enough. So Dr. Piasek made an introduction for me a few months back back, and we began talking to the group from Merit and then the group from the Rural Behavioral Health Initiative in Montana. And so they're joining us tonight on the screen. I've had the opportunity to see their presentation a couple of times. We wanted to bring that to you. I will put the slide up in the front and have to work with our guests on WebEx to advance the slides for you accordingly. Revere, John, Janet, would you like to jump in and do a brief introduction, and then we can get going on the slides? You are on mute. Maybe we'll go on mute. There we go. Are you able to hear us? There we are. Hello. Were you able to hear the introduction?
Hi, everybody.
Good evening.
Can you hear us?
We can.
Hi, Kelly. Super. Well, I guess we're on, and happy to be here. My name's Revere Greist. I work for Merit Solutions here in Madison. John Greist is here, and just to clear up any confusion, there's a relationship there. He's my father. Just to be clear about that. And also on the meeting this evening, we have Janet Lindau, who's Executive Director of Rural Behavioral Health Institute in Livingston, Montana. And we'd just like to take a moment with, I think, Joe's support to tell you about Screening Link to Care, which is a program in Montana that has been very effective at screening kids for suicide risk and other behavioral health issues and providing follow-up care to them, both on the day of the screening and on an ongoing basis to establish continuity of care. So, Janet, if it's okay with you, I'll turn it over to you, and I think you can probably share your screen and show your presentation.
That sounds good. Let me just find the right one. All right, can everyone see that all right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yes. Great. So as Revere said, we are two companies that collaborate closely and have for a number of years now, and I've been working with John for the last 7, so we know each other really well at this point. And we offer a suicide prevention program called Screening Link to Care that's appropriate for middle and high school age students, so ages about 11 or 12 through 18. And we wanted to talk with you a little bit and start from a data perspective, which is where we always start from. We provide evidence-based programming. So I looked up how suicide looks in Wisconsin, and you guys are doing about the same as the national average, which means that suicide is the second leading cause of death among kids 15 through middle age 44 years old. So the only thing that kills people more in Wisconsin are accidents. And also, fairly concerningly, and this is true in all our states, but we're losing a lot of children and adolescents and young adults to suicide. So in the past 5 years, 220 adolescents in Wisconsin have died by suicide. So we're working with school districts to try to reduce that and make sure kids are getting to the mental health care that they need. So the program has 2 main components. The first is a digital screening component, which is offered by Merit Solutions. It has the best suicide prediction assessment called the Columbia Suicide Severity Rating Scale. This is FDA, WHO, and CDC recommended for assessing suicide risk. And we also look at suicide risk factors, depression, anxiety symptoms. They're very common, they're treatable, and we want to get to kids before they actually develop suicidality, and one way to do that is to work on depression, anxiety symptoms. So that's component 1. The second component is Once a student has self-reported that they have recent suicidality, they are further evaluated by a clinician. That can be a school-based clinician if the schools have them. Otherwise, my organization offers teletherapists to support students at school. So the way Screening Linked to Care works is students complete the screening tool, again offered by Merit. It takes them less than 10 minutes to complete on average, and they can complete it on any digital device that hooks up to the internet. So if they're, at least in Montana, if they're given the opportunity, they take it on their smartphones, but it works just fine on school computers or tablets. Once a student has completed the screener, the results are immediately sent to a designated person at the school. And one thing I want to point out is these results are de-identified. So my company and Merit have no way of identifying an actual student. Only people at the school who have access to both the student ID that's used in the system and the student's name can identify a student. So once the student's been identified by that school staff member as having a high risk of suicidality, and we have reports that are super easy to read, it does not need to be a clinician looking at it, that person then finds the student and connects them with whatever clinician is available, whether it's a school-based clinician or a teletherapist that we're providing. During that evaluation, on the same day the student took the screener, the clinician does a safety evaluation, make sure the student is safe to go home. And they also do a brief intervention, which is largely creating a safety plan. So they identify triggers for when a student is experiencing suicidality, and they also identify protective factors. So what are things the student can utilize when they're feeling suicidal? And lastly, and probably most importantly, that the student is given a referral out for additional care. And if the family is having difficulties finding care, my organization offers brief case management, because what we don't want to have happen is that we identify a student, they need care, and then they never get to the care, because that's not going to result in the mental health improvement that we're looking for. So we offer that, and then also we offer bridge psychiatric care, because it often can be a very long wait until kids can get to see a psychiatrist if that is indicated. Now that is the minority of students that would need that type of care, but we want to make sure it's available, and currently we're able to offer that within 2 weeks of screening. So we're getting the kids into the care they need very rapidly. I just want to go over the screening platform, again, offered by Merit. It's an incredibly adaptive platform. It's easy to use. They've set up a custom software now that the school will be able to access their data at any time. But it contains a suicide risk prediction scale. Again, that's Columbia Suicide Severity Rating Scale. A scale for measuring depression symptoms and anxiety symptoms, 2 different scales. Nothing in this screening tool is diagnostic. We're looking at symptomology and the severity of symptoms. And then schools, if they want, can measure possible substance or alcohol misuse. That is an option. You don't have to do it, but the suicide risk and the depression anxiety symptom scales are in all the screeners we offer. So what my organization does is called Implementation Science. And so what we're doing is we have a program to offer, but schools tell us how they want to use it, and then we help schools figure out how to integrate it into their curriculum if that's what's desired, and how to make it work for them in a sustainable way. So we do a lot of preparation initially, and so this is like making a bunch of decisions, which I'll run through real quickly in the next slide. And we're really trying to tailor that program for schools to make it as applicable to what the school needs as possible. Then we help deliver the program, and then we're constantly looking for how to make this easier on schools and better for students. So we ask for a lot of feedback. And then finally, we work with schools on how they can sustain the program if it's desired. So for example, Title 4A funds can be used to support this program. And then we also work on what kind of staffing that, they may want to involve, training, anything the school needs. So I just want to go through the process in slightly more detail. So when I was talking about getting schools set up for success, one of the things we do is we meet with the involved school staff, and the school can decide who those staff are going to be. But we need a point person, and this person is really going to be the driver at a school for the entire program. So this can be anyone. It could be a school counselor or a trusted teacher, whoever feels like they want to kind of be the lead at the school for this. We assign roles to staff, so everyone has a very clear picture of what they need to do. The school can decide which grades they want to screen, so this is available for 6th through 12th grades, but some schools don't want to screen all of their kids. They just want to start with one class or one grade. We can decide how many students will screen during a day, what date and what time period during the day they want to screen, which assessments you want to use, and then where in the school screening is going to happen. Next piece is figuring out clinical care. So some schools have clinicians that they want to use for that same day care, and some schools do not. So we work with you to figure out what will work best for your school. And then we also collect parental consents. Most schools in Montana use opt-out consent. So they send informational packets home to all parents with a consent form, but the parent only needs to return that consent form if they do not want their child to participate. We do have opt-in, which means they can write in and then their student can participate. Whatever a school wants, again, we work with schools to make sure they get what they need. So once all of that's been decided and we have set up a screening day, the students complete the screening, and then they fall into one of three categories. This red category is what we're concerned about. These are kids that say within the past 3 months they've had suicidal thoughts with the intention to die and/or suicidal behaviors. These kids are the ones that need to be seen the same day as they screen. There are also kids in this yellow category that have said at some point in their lives they've thought seriously about suicide and wanted to die, or had suicidal behaviors like an attempt. And some of the kids also may have clinically significant depression and/or anxiety symptoms. So these kids don't need to be seen the same day, but we do want to check in with them to see how they're doing and just see if they need some extra support. And then there are kids that have no significant depression or anxiety symptoms and reported no suicidality in their lifetimes. And those kids, we don't need to do anything. And what we're seeing in these categories, we see about 7 to 8% in Montana, and our rates are like well above national average in this red category, and about 10% in this yellow, just to give you a feel for that. But these are the categories we worry about, and then both kids in the red and the yellow qualify for case management services, and that is basically they work with our case managers to figure out, they do a needs assessment to figure out what the family needs, and then helps that family reduce barriers to getting to whatever care is needed. So I'm not going to go through that whole piece. But I just want to end by saying we provide schools with as many resources as they need. We want to set schools up for success. If we don't have a resource and the school really needs it, we'll provide it to them. But one of the biggest things I think we offer is we have a database full of resources for students and families. So what we would do if we were working with your school district is we would build a database of all available providers and other resources. They might be youth groups or anything that a family might be looking for, food resource centers, things like that. And we would be able to provide those resources to families and the school to use as part of the program. There was a question about, about where we get our funding. So the state of Montana is funding for this program largely so that schools across the state can offer this for free. That would be something we would be pursuing in Wisconsin. States tend to have a lot of funding for mental health programming for students. And then this is how you get a hold of me. You can scan that QR code or use the email. And we'd be happy to take any questions you might have. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak with you today.
Do you have any questions right now?
I just have a quick one. Janet, can you hear me?
You're muted.
I'm muted. Oh, the room is muted. Okay.
Yeah, it's on the side.
There we are.
Is that better?
Can you hear us now?
We can, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. Janet, I just wanted to ask you guys, well, I'll see if I can. That might help. Are you able to speak to, Janet, how many screenings you've done in Montana so far?
Hit the button again.
Sorry, I'm not getting any.
I think there's an echo. I'm going to mute myself.
Okay, go ahead, ask the question.
Are you, Janet, are you able to speak to how many screenings you've done in Montana already?
Oh, sure. So we've done just under 10,000 screens in the last year and a half. So some of those kids have been screened more than once. And I will say what we're seeing with that longitudinal data is really helpful because we're able to zero in on the kids that are not improving. And we have very limited mental health resources in Montana, and so we're able to really target the resources towards the kids that need it the most.
And just to add to that, just to comment on the growth of this program in Montana, Janet and RBHI have done an incredible job of reaching out to different communities and bringing this to as many students as possible. In the 2021-22 school year, they screened about 1,020 kids, so that was sort of a pilot year. In the fall semester of 2022, they screened 4,000 kids, more or less. I could have that slightly wrong, Janet. And in the spring semester of this year, they'll screen upwards of 20 to 22,000 kids. And that's about a quarter of the population in this age cohort in Montana, in the state of Montana. So in Wisconsin, there are about 400,000 kids from 6th to 12th grade. In Montana, it's 70 to 80,000 kids. But this is really growing in the state, and I think that just reflects the benefit that this is bringing to kids and communities in Montana. And another thing I just wanted to say is that in every screening RBHI does, they find at least one kid who is not on the school's or the parents' radar as being at risk of suicide or experiencing serious mental health issues. So, we're really finding those needles in a haystack who need help, but haven't been able to come forward and seek help yet. It's a wonderful project to be involved with.
And if you can follow me, maybe just one other follow-up I'd like to ask you to comment on. This is maybe for Revere or John. What I like about your approach is the clinical nature of the instruments that you're using. For the Columbia specifically, can you comment about the validation history on that particular tool?
Well, the Columbia was developed in the first 10 years of the century. By 2009, it had been approved by FDA. We converted it to electronic administration that year and validated it in 2009 at Rogers Memorial Hospital in the IVR version and 2 years later in the text version. So the validation is local, and a lot of the writing of the electronic version was done here in Wisconsin. One of the authors was from the East Coast. The rest were all from Madison, Wisconsin.
And maybe I could just add to that quickly. and say that the Columbia is really the gold standard for suicide risk assessment in healthcare, in drug development, so for FDA trials. And typically it's administered in a face-to-face interview between a nurse and a patient. And although it's a great assessment, by administering it electronically as we're doing and gathering data directly from students, there are certain advantages that come with that approach. One is that we eliminate the variability in the way the questions are asked. So they're asked the same way every single time, and that produces a clearer signal of suicide risk. And then on the student side, whenever you ask somebody about a stigmatized topic, so suicide risk factors, alcohol use, for example, people are more honest with the computer than they are with a clinician. And so that's another factor that contributes to the clarity of the signal that we have about suicide risk. And that's really important, obviously, from the perspective of false negatives. When you're screening for suicide risk, you don't want to have any false negatives. But in an environment where there are scarce clinical resources, like a school setting, it's really important from the perspective of false positives as well. You don't want to identify a bunch of people who are not actually at risk and give them resources that could go to those who actually need help. So this is really the best instrument to use to do this screening. You know, we're part of the equation, but really the key is what Janet and RBHI have done to, at the conclusion of the screening, bring care to people and make sure that they get care on the same day and then continuity of care going forward. So it's a great team effort.
Just want to add the depression, anxiety, and substance alcohol misuse scales are all validated for use in adolescents, meaning they've been tested in tens of thousands of adolescents, and the signal that we get from them is real. So just the whole screening package that Merit has developed is about the best out there, which is why we have partnered with them.
Any other questions or comments? Mr. Moore?
Janet, can you hear me? Okay. Oh, sorry. Okay, so my question for you, Janet, is could you give more specific details on the demographics of those screenings and like what are you seeing in terms of gender or any other demographics in terms of the kids that you are screening?
So we don't collect demographics, but I can give you a feel for them. So we have 7 tribal nations in Montana, and we are working with multiples of that. And the screening tools have been validated for use in broad demographic spread in adolescents. Montana is, I think we're 90% white, and then about 7% Native American. So those are the demographics we're using them in right now. But again, everything's validated for a broad variety of cultures and ethnicities and races.
Mrs. Zenobia?
Thank you for being here. So once you identify the students, have you had any issues there with getting the resources available to treat them?
Yeah, so one of the reasons we added case management onto our program is because parents were telling us that they needed to call 10 or 15 different therapists just to try to find an appointment. So one of the things that we do when we start in a new place is we contact all of the licensed providers. So this is something we would build over the summer, and we want in place before we screen a single child in Wisconsin or any other state. And so we have a whole list of providers that we are able to refer to, and they're actually preferentially taking kids that are identified via screening because they're fairly well vetted. Our therapists are pretty burned out here. They're getting kids in crisis day after day after day. And when we can send them a kid that they know what's going on with that child, and we can match up with appropriate insurance and so forth, it really helps reduce all those barriers to care that exist in rural America, but also pretty much anywhere in America.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Actually, can I just add two things just to give you, I just want to give you a flavor. So we're getting kids engaged in our case management services on average about 3.5 days after screening, just to give you a sense of how long it takes. And then if they see our psychiatrist, which is only about 25% of them that would need to see a psychiatrist versus a therapist, they're seeing her, we're just over 12 days from screening, getting them to see our psychiatrist. So just to give you an idea.
John or Revere, would you be able to take us through the screener and then show what the results would look like when they were outputted to a school?
I can absolutely do that if you'll give me a moment to call it up. Sorry, I just need to look it up here in my email, and I can do that, no problem.
While he's doing that, maybe I could just share a couple things that I learned in talking with Janet that I thought was well thought through. They stagger the screening, so they don't do everybody at once, with the intent that if that, between 10 to 20% might need some follow-up, that they have sufficient resources to follow up. So it's not like we're doing everybody on the same day and then trying to figure out how to get support. And the other thing, I think she shared like an average time that it takes to complete the whole screening process. But for that majority of kids who are in that low-risk category, the logic in the tool that they built does bypass some follow-up questions. And so I think, Janet, you could correct me, was it something like 3 to 5 minutes for a low risk?
That's correct. And we see some variability based on reading ability. So 6th graders tend to take a little bit longer than older kids. They tend to ask more questions. Honestly, they want to they're very careful about, they want to be answering accurately, which we found fascinating.
So just a quick update. I've had to update my system preferences to be able to share my screen. I'm being told I have to drop off and then come back on. So I'm going to do that quickly if that's okay for everybody. I'll be gone for just a moment and I'll come back and I can take you through the screen here and show you what this looks like. So just please give me a moment.
We will be here.
Okay.
I don't know where I'm getting picked up, but we can get one more session when we do walking topics. If you have questions on or what we do on that text.
I'll just keep going with questions while we're filling time, though. Janet, what has been the response from parents?
Okay, I'm back, and it looks like this is working, basically. So I got to agree to that and then share. And then, can you all see my screen right now?
We can.
Okay, great. So we've been running our screener on a platform called Qualtrics, which you may have heard of. It's a very sophisticated survey platform that works really well in most respects. you're looking for. That's essentially how the system works. And happy to have any questions you guys have.
Yes, thank you very much. One important thing, and I'll do my best to minimize my microphone. The thing that really is nice about what they've just presented is it all stays within the realm of parent, child, student, and then mental health provider. And the school acts as a vehicle in this, whereby we provide a site, a testing location. We do have a school rep, but that, if we were thinking about Waukesha, that would be a school psychologist, a school counselor, a school social worker. But we don't have our general classroom teachers included in this work. And as we talked about that continuum of things tonight, this being kind of the most targeted, direct access to service, this approach that they're using in Montana is very beneficial for us, I believe, in looking at, because it keeps it out of the hands of the classroom teacher. It's not an extra burden there. So if there are any questions for John, Revere, and Janet, I certainly will stop talking now.
Any questions? Okay.
Cook, I actually was writing down. I agree with you. I think that teachers, it's too much societal-wise on teachers. Teachers just want to teach. They didn't go to school to be therapists. They didn't go to school to be social workers. So I think that this is actually a good way to lessen the burden for them so that they can actually do their actual job and be teachers. And also lessen the burden so that they don't keep leaving because we're putting too much on them as a society. So,
thank you.
Can I add one more thing too? So we're starting to get some longitudinal data, and we're looking at anxiety symptom severity, and we're seeing statistically significant decreases, meaning kids are having less depression and anxiety symptoms over time. And we don't have a control group we're comparing against, but in general, kids tend to get worse, not better, during adolescence with depression and anxiety. So what we know about depression and anxiety is kids, they have concentration issues, they have behavioral issues, they may not be doing well at school, they have trouble with their social interactions. So I would say while this is a suicide prevention intervention, I think the largest impact it may have is helping kids feel well so that they can basically be the best versions of themselves and hopefully reduce classroom issues that lead to expulsions and suspensions and things like that are bad for students and bad for schools.
How far back does your longitudinal data go?
So we just have from this year to last year with about 900 students. So that's preliminary data. But so I'm a research scientist, and what I can say is that it looks as good as if the kids were on antidepressants or anti-anxiety drugs for how big of improvement we're seeing. But I can't guarantee that it's due to our intervention because we haven't tested against a control group at the same age group.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions, comments?
So thank you so much for joining us tonight. We will shut down the WebEx portion and then hopefully eliminate the echo that we have in here. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
So long.
Okay, we do not have an echo anymore. So as I said, as we started to frame this, we talked kind of more broadly about the universal level things that can happen and tailor this down specifically. In my conversations with their team, the level of background that they have in the assessment and the psychiatry, psychology in this is tremendous. I believe when I talked to John, just for some perspective, he started practicing at UW like in 1967, and he has been involved with this for the last 55 years, if my math is correct. Revere has been very connected to this. I believe it's been over the last 20 years. And the work that they started to do out in Montana was very much a grassroots effort to try to address the reality that they faced being the state with the highest level of adolescent suicide. So as we talk tonight, you know, particularly like around the YRBS data, there was some questions around what can we do from an actionable standpoint. And I would say that we can do broader systems things with YRBS data and kind of get a general trend. When we write for a mental health grant, either through the United Way or the DPI, that data is good for us to say this percentage of our students are expressing this. But it doesn't give us any sort of pathway to help for those kids. What this does is it allows us, it would allow us, it would be something if you're interested in us continuing this discussion, it allows us then to get to that child-specific intervention that we could employ so that we could get kids help that need help. So I'm available for any questions if you have it. Not that this is an action item tonight, but just kind of the casual nod of head if you want us to continue to pursue this discussion with them before we would come forward with any formal approval. We wanted to get this in front of you so you could kind of put your eyes on it.
So just to clarify, this is a new tool or process. It's not replacing anything.
Correct. And it's not, we're not doing it, you know, we're just talking about it. But it is something unique that's happening. Oftentimes you'll see discussions around, you know, doing a classroom-based mental health screener that the teacher administers, and then kind of what do you do with the data? The thing that this does is it takes the teacher out of it. It uses the school environment. So we talked about PATH providing on-site treatment, but it takes the teacher component out, and it keeps all of this process in the hands of people who are trained in mental health. And that is, I believe that is of a huge benefit, because then, again, like Markel was saying, we're not getting into this, like, what are we asking our teachers to do more of? What we're just using is classroom space to do a screener, and then deferring it to experts if the results warrant it.
Mr. Montiel?
Sorry, very briefly, and I'm not looking for an answer now, and I actually prefer not to have one now, but I'd like to get some information in the future. I certainly want to learn more about this. I think it sounds like a great tool, about when the mandatory reporting issue is triggered. I don't want to dissuade anybody from.
Yeah, so mandatory reporting would be triggered in the areas of mental health. Like, we would be required to report to families if there's a level of suicidality. So the nice thing, again, about this is the parents, they give permission for the student to participate, and then the kids take it, and then we get that result. And that result, then we engage families right away. The area where we would begin to do a referral for reporting abuse and neglect is if we didn't see follow-through. And then we would call and be like, hey, guys, we got a kid who's suicidal. We're seeing it at school. The results of this, we just need to do some follow-up. But that's generally something we engage families at the onset of us knowing that there's that risk before we start to move into reporting to an agency. We want because it really is that continuum of care for the student, and that involves the family, it involves the school, it involves the outside therapist. It's a team approach to try to help a kid with this.
And I think the general lady mentioned opting out. I think you just mentioned opting in.
Getting consent to do it. So, like, I mean, parents have to say, either through a passive consent, which is, we're going to do this with all ninth graders, just using that as an example, do it with all ninth graders. Ninth graders sign up. Parents then would opt out if they didn't want their child to participate. But you're giving consent then if you don't
So that's a
opt
discussion we can have, whether it's opt in or opt out.
Correct. You can talk about that.
All right.
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Comments? Mrs. Zenobia?
It would just seem that this would free up some resources on the screening end. We're seeing it would make an improvement in places where we're trying to do this and we're not maybe doing all we could be doing or as effectively, or however you want to put it. So it could save us some time and
Yep.
do a better job of identifying these things.
Yeah,
From
and
what you're
it's,
saying.
yeah, it's critically important to get kids the help that they need. And we just don't want kids laying in the weeds and, getting to the point where they feel hopeless and despair and don't think that there's another option for them.
100%.
Anything else? Okay. All righty. Keep talking. Okay. Next up is the discipline work group update.
Yeah, so here we are, waiting to get the screen up. Okay. So as we've done monthly, we have just provided you a brief update as to where we're at as far as the discipline committee. We met as a committee, or as a team, Thursday, January 26th, and then Thursday, February 23rd. And Mark Leonard has taken the team now as we get into that school-based planning into that. Our February meeting really focused on what planning are we going to do. Again, we took a look at district trends and local school data, and then how are schools going to build in a plan to address either a social and academic behavior in their schools, and what are they going to target. Mark did an excellent job facilitating an elementary discussion and then a secondary discussion, so the groups split, and the schools really shared what their approach has been, their area of focus, and then their approach to behavior. And what we've seen now is a number of schools that they've been putting their heads together and they're sharing how they're communicating, for instance, how they're setting their classrooms up. And that's going to continue then into our March meeting. So the share out on our Tier 1 behavior plans, teacher audit of the climate, communication, curriculum, and culture. Again, utilizing that RTI approach to behavior book that we talked about a number of meetings ago. Creating a school-wide precise problem statement, again, making sure that we're being strategic and focused on an area to try to address, and then one academic and one social standard to focus on. So this work is going to be ongoing. Our teams, what you might hear at the TNL meeting is that we're shifting into that third 100 days of our sale planning. This is coinciding with that last 100 days, and then that'll lead into some of that summer work that we have coming up. What I'd like to show you again, just to give you some perspective on behavior, like what we're seeing. We've talked about this a number of times. This year, we are seeing more behavior, or more behavior referrals. Our frame of reference is our frame of reference is last school year, 21-22. I kept saying that about our earlier discussions, 19-20, but 21-22. When I break this out, which I will do for you, I'll break it out by majors and minors. And so what you see is 12,442 office discipline referrals written this year, or referrals written this year. This is the total number of majors and minors that we have in the system. Just for some perspective, we did talk about the dress code earlier. I'm trying to find the dress code violations for this school year. I'm sorry, I'm used to looking at a bigger screen as I do this. My apologies. I believe it's captured under inappropriate language and expression or interaction. So I think you see in this 2100, that is where we've been coding our dress code. We haven't pulled it out of there, which is something that if the board would wish us to do in the future, we certainly could do that. But as I break that down and go into the filter, if I filter data under major, minor, what I want to show you is the majors. So this would be the office involved. My apologies. The blue bar is loading up there. Maybe I'm getting the wheel of death. There we are. If I filter this by majors and minors, and if I click major, a major referral is the referral that is office managed. What you can see is, from a referral standpoint, in the 22-23 school year, there are 8,000 of the 12,000 are office managed referrals. Last year it was 5896. So when you think about year to date, we do not have all schools at this point consistently using the minor infraction in here. So that is an area that we're working through that discipline committee to begin to norm with our schools as to how are you coding and reporting office managed versus classroom managed referrals. And that is something that if you go school by school, you can see some schools, particularly at our middle levels, that have done a really good job of coding major and minor. You'll see that they're the highest level of referrals, but it's almost a 3-to-1. 3 minor referrals to 1 major referral. And so as you look at the data up there, and as you see, we'll bring schools forward to talk about what their plans are April, May at this committee. What you see from the data perspective is there's going to be some inconsistencies this year. You're going to see more things recorded because of the attention to the minors. And you're also going to see that there are some schools where you're like, that school only has 600 kids. Why is it leading us in referrals? It's because of that minor referral component. And there'll be more information to come in the months ahead on that.
Quick question. Are you saying that the major number is inflated because they're counting minors as the major?
I'm saying the total number is inflated this year. I don't want to use the term inflated. The number is higher this year, and it's higher in regard to the fact that many schools are focusing on a certain behavior issue. We've talked about that, like here, about personal cell phones being one area, the technology violation. Secondary schools are really paying attention to that. The other area that we're seeing a much higher referral rate on, or a record rate on, is the minor referral. And like I said, at some of our middle schools, Butler Middle School, for instance, has put a concerted effort into that minor category. And you're seeing higher numbers as a result of that.
Okay.
Now, it doesn't excuse negative school behavior, but when we've heard from staff and what principals have reported, yes, they're seeing the behavior, but it feels a little bit more controlled than last year. It feels like the environment is a little bit calmer. If you remember some of our earlier discussions at this committee were like, we didn't anticipate some of the behaviors that we had seen. Some of this caught us by surprise post-pandemic, like we didn't quite know what we were getting. This year, people feel like they have a handle on it. And as we go through that action planning into the future, we hope then to see some of these numbers start to trend down, particularly in the major referral area. You know, the aggression, the cell phone violation, those are the things that we want to start to see a decline in.
And you're going to attribute that decline to what?
Targeted effort and targeted
behavior
reminder.
If you
engaging
misbehave.
kids in what the expectations are early and engaging their parents in what the expectations are early.
Okay.
You'll always see us keeping a record of what we see. I mean, when you start to action plan, you action plan off of what your majors and your minors are.
Mm-hmm.
So you'll see records in there, and those records may go up, they may go down.
Right.
But what we're hoping to see is that balance between minors and majors really starts to shift.
Okay.
And we see things that are handled, low-level things, noted and recorded at the classroom level versus a lot of high-level things then that make it to the office. You know, if we pay attention to the small details, we believe we'll see some of the big things start to decrease.
So we're not necessarily thinking there's going to be a change in referrals. It's just be the majors will be less and the
That's
minors
what the
will
hope
increase.
is.
Yes.
That's what the hope is. And then at time, we see the minors decrease too.
Yeah.
You know, right? Like it's going to involve an attention to one,
Yep.
low-level things, if we do a good job with that, we should see the higher level stuff go down.
Right.
And then over time, then we begin to see the low level stuff go down too, because it's understood and it's just not being observed in the school anymore.
Okay. Do you have any idea about how many referrals are not being given? Because that was a complaint for a while.
Right. So I can't say that is gone.
Okay.
Based off of the number of minors that I've seen, particularly at the middle level,
Right.
I see that there's a buy-in and a level of engagement in, hey, if we pay attention to this and we create a record of it, and then we refer it to the office and we engage the families, like I see that different now than I have in the past. And then there is a degree though, like in order to really do this well, and it's in the years to come, you need to get consistency across departments. You need consistency across grade levels, houses, whatever it might be, so that what goes in my class is the same thing that goes in your class, instead of it changes from period to period, or I handle everything and you pass it all off to the office. That's some of the work that we can do with this committee then that filters into the school.
Okay, excellent. Any other questions, Mr. Munn?
Sorry. I was at a school a couple weeks ago, and an educator who used to teach at MPS asked if we do pendings, is what he called them. And they talked about pending suspensions, whereas I was discussing with this educator, and they said, what are the biggest successes where you see, what's a biggest component of success in student discipline? He said parental or guardians, involvement.
Right.
So how have you seen that it happened and it worked? And he said, well, they used to do pending suspensions. I don't know if that's something you're familiar with or something we're looking into. I'm just throwing it out there as.
We can certainly look into the mechanics behind that. I would like to see what does that, if you're like holding the suspension in abeyance for a short period of time, giving the kid essentially a second chance to make a correction to themselves, or to do some level of restorative practice before the suspension would go through.
Not
I'd have
really.
to dig into the mechanics of a pending.
Right. From my understanding, based on his explanation, here's your pending suspension, whatever the term is. If you can get your parents or guardians or a responsible adult in here to talk about it, we can address maybe a different solution, something like that. Get the parents in.
Sure, a restorative level of behavior before you got to an actual suspension.
Yep.
We could certainly talk about that.
Okay, yeah, thank you.
Yep.
Mr. Moore, do you have something?
No, I was
No.
going to inform, but Mr. Montiel.
Okay. All right, any other questions regarding the discipline committee?
Our next meeting is this Thursday.
Yep.
And then we'll be back to you with our work in April.
Awesome. All righty, that concludes our discussion information items. Other business, does anybody have any recommendations for future meetings? If you do, let myself and Dr. Cook know, and we will get it on the
Mr.
agenda.
McCaffrey?
Yes.
Last board meeting, Mr. Zenobia asked about AEDs and first aid CPR. We'll have an update in April.
Okay.
Just given where the agenda was at tonight, we bumped it to April instead of having it on this evening.
Excellent. All righty, that concludes our meeting. Meeting adjourned.
I have a lot more questions.